Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D and WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Had a Bad Luck Quirk. All credits for this video go to their respective authors. So please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. When Midoriya Izuku woke up that morning, he had already known it was going to be a bad day. He could tell because when he glanced into his bathroom mirror, it promptly shattered into a cracked and distorted image of himself for no reason. Almost absent-mindedly, Izuku checked over himself while brushing his teeth. Not only was his quirk producing an unusually high amount of energy today, though it would be unfelt by anyone that wasn't him, breaking the mirror caused it to increase even more. He would have to be careful while he let it trickle out of him, or he might seriously hurt himself. A quick check on his phone proved his suspicions as to why his quirk had been so active. The horoscope said that Cancers should watch out for bad luck. Sometimes Izuku really hates that astrology wasn't complete bullshit when it came to him. No one else gets their day ruined just because the horoscope said it would happen. But there was still a smile on his face as he looked into the broken mirror. Seeing it reminded him to keep his spirits up. "Mom, I'm leaving for school now." And, the mirror broke again. "Sorry, it's okay, sweetie. That's why we bought so many extras. Have a nice day." His mother stopped in the middle of her morning prep to give him a quick kiss and soft smile. "I love you, dear." Izuku smiled back at her brightly. "Love you too, Mom." Despite the earlier omen, it was just another day for Midoriya Izuku on his way to school. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. The grass at the edge of the sidewalk was just so green, it almost made him want to stop and smell the flowers. The smile on his face was just as bright as his surroundings. But then he just barely dodged out of the way of falling bird poop, gifted graciously to him by the aforementioned singing birds. And in his attempt he stepped on a wayward rock, which caused him to trip and hit his head on the concrete. Sitting up from his fall with a groan, Izuku felt the back of his head. It didn't seem to be bleeding, and he succeeded in missing the bird poop. So overall, he'd call this one a win. The smile returned to his face. It was just another day for Izuku, but sometimes navigating through his life could get difficult. That's just how it is when luck isn't on your side. Izuku had learned many lessons when his quirk first appeared. The first was that all men were not created equal. The second was that some people were born into this world lucky and others were born into it unlucky. Or as the more common saying went, some were born lucky and some were just lucky to be born. The third thing that Izuku had learnt was that he was born unlucky. And that wasn't him being dramatic, he was quite literally born unlucky. That's what his quirk turned out to be. His quirk, Jinx, produced a constant amount of bad luck which he could either inflict on himself, specific targets, or just let permeate the area around him like he was a cursed charm. He preferred to keep his quirk inflicted on himself, rather than accidentally cause trouble for or hurt other people. This led to him facing a constant stream of various but small misfortunes in his everyday life. Tripping, stepping in animal droppings, oversleeping, missing the train, broken mirrors, glasses, plates, electronics, the list was endless, so it was better if he just didn't keep track of it all. Sometimes, he felt like his quirk might be affecting him even when he turned it off. His mother swore up and down that he wasn't the reason why Dad never came back. But he's pretty sure that was a lie. No one wants a child that's essentially cursed. No one except Mom, that is. And it was only her existence that reminded Izuku that there was still fortune in his life, even with having a quirk like Jinx. It's not even the misfortune caused by his quirk that gets to him, it's just everyone else's reaction to his quirk that does. If everyone accepted it like his mom did, then he would be happy even with all the bad luck he had to deal with. But even through all of this, he kept a smile on his face. Most of the time it didn't feel like a real smile. But sometimes it was, like when he was with Mom. He didn't let the misfortune, both from his quirk and his lack of positive social interaction as a consequence of it, cause his smile to fall. Because if he did, then he would simply never smile at all. The thing he loved most about All Might was the way the hero could smile in even the most dire of situations. Izuku wanted to be a hero like that too, though everyone around him thought that it was impossible for him to be a hero. "Sensei, when I took this test, I was next to Midoriya. You know we always do worse when we're by him. Can I get some extra credit points to boost my score?" From his seat in class, Izuku pretended to not hear the conversation. His teacher just sighed in annoyance, and you know that Midoriya always turns his quirk off during tests so that his own scores don't get affected. If you guess an answer wrong, it's not because of his quirk, but you don't really know for sure if he's keeping it off. What if it was on and that's why I did bad? In the end, his classmate was given a small amount of extra credit in an attempt to compromise, just as most of the people who were by Izuku during tests got. The teachers didn't believe it was worth the effort to put up with their needling in the name of Izuku's honor when they could just put a stop to it by giving up a couple of points. It usually didn't change their grades by much, but they still went through the motions just to get their boost. The only person that didn't was his childhood friend that was no longer a friend, Kaken, who seemed to think being placed next to Izuku was just an extra challenge for him to overcome. Maybe that was why Kaken was always placed by him in seating arrangements. With that out of the way, his teacher could finally begin homeroom. You guys are third years now. It's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. I would hand out these future career forms, but his teacher tossed the papers aside with a smiling shrug. A stray paper rode an air current across the room to slap Izuku in the face, blinding him with white for a moment. I assume you all want to be heroes. The classroom broke out into cheers as people started to haphazardly show off their quirks. Izuku, of course, kept his reined into its normal amount of slightly bad luck. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks, but you know it's against the rules to use them in school. Sensei, don't lump me in with these extras. Izuku leaned away slightly when Kaken started yelling, as if I have anything like their crappy quirks. Ah, Bakugo, you're applying for UA, of course, the teacher commented in an impressed tone. The muttering around Izuku continued. Did you hear how high the cutoff is this year? They barely accept anyone. When Kaken slammed his foot onto the desk, Izuku jolted in place. Shut up all of you. I aced the mock exam, and I'm the only one that has what it takes to get into UA. I'm going to surpass All Might and become the top hero, not to mention becoming rich at the same time. Well, it was only natural that Kaken felt that he could accomplish all those things. After all, he was born lucky. What else can you say about a person that's born with a flashy quirk perfect for being a hero? Born to good, loving, and fairly well-off parents. Come to think of it, Midori is also trying for UA. Kaken froze as Izuku felt his stomach drop into the floor. The joyful atmosphere became tense, as his classmates stole looks at him only to quickly look away. There were no jeers or laughs, but he could hear them whisper amongst themselves. Unlucky Izuku, trying to be a hero. Even more than that, trying to get into UA. You need luck to get into a school like that. Who ever heard of a hero that's bad luck? That's a villain's quirk. Ah, there it is. It always comes around to that eventual. Being a bringer of misfortune is a bad quirk, so it could only be a villain's quirk. That's how they all think. Kaken didn't say anything, but Izuku knew it wouldn't last for long. As soon as the day was over and the small protection the teacher provided was gone, he made his move. Izuku leaned back when Kaken slammed his hand onto his desk, only to go back too far and tip his chair over in a clatter of noise and pain. Kaken just scowled down at the pitiful sight of Izuku on the ground. What the hell do you think you're playing at, Deku? You're cursed. You can't possibly be a hero or make it into UA. Forget crappy quirks. Your quirk is a hindrance, even less than useless. Don't let it get to you. Don't let it get to you. He just feels that way because he knows firsthand how people around you get hurt. Don't let your smile fall. As Izuku picked himself up, he gave Kaken an awkward smile. I know it's unlikely, but there's no harm in trying. No harm in trying. Get a load of this guy. He says that like he doesn't tip over in his chair once a day. One of Kaken's friends chuckled to the others. They never tried to antagonize Izuku when it was just themselves, probably wary of being cursed by his quirk, but Kaken always made them more arrogant. Kaken swiped Izuku's notebook off his desk. What do we have here? For my future. Be real, Deku. What are you gonna do? Win fights by making the villains trip over themselves. The notebook was fried to bits in the middle of Kaken's small palm explosions. Then, it was thrown out the window only to land in the water fountain. Izuku's smile dropped a fair amount, but he managed to keep the ends of his mouth tensed up into an almost smile. The sight of it just made Kaken scowl harder. That smile of yours is so fake, it makes me want to blast it off your face. Who the fuck do you think you're fooling? A creepy, miserable person like you can't be like All Might, so just give it up. I'm a perfectionist. I want my hero origin story to be perfect. Kaken pointed to himself with his thumb. I'm going to be the first and only hero from this crappy public middle school, so don't even dare try getting into UA. Scoffing a bit, Kaken's sneer turned into a mean smirk. Though, I shouldn't say that you can't show up in my story at all. If you end up being a villain I take down in the future, there'd be nothing wrong with that. Kaken knew as well as Izuku that he would never turn to villainy, but he said that anyway because he knew it would hurt. Izuku felt himself flinch at the comment. After seeing that Izuku didn't plan on fighting back, Kaken tisked and turned around to walk out the door of the classroom, only to stop and give Izuku one last smirking glance over his shoulder. Oh, but if you want to be a hero so badly, there's a quick way to do it. Believe that you'll be born with a good quirk in your next life and take a swan dive off the roof. Izuku flinched hard, but any words he could make died in his attempt to stuff his pain back into the box he kept inside himself. The smile fell off his face, causing him to bite at his lip. Don't let it get to you. Don't let it get to you. Don't let it get to you. Don't. Kaken and the others that hung out with him were gone for a fair while before Izuku started getting up to leave. Before he left the classroom to pick up his notebook and leave, he gave a long look at the classroom window next to him. After a stretch of silence that wasn't even filled by his usual muttering thoughts, he turned his back to it and left. He thought that was the peak of it, that was the worst his luck that day had to offer him. But it wasn't. His next string of misfortune was a double hit. Just as he was about to go through a tunnel on his way home, he got a phone call from the Musutafu General Hospital saying that his mother had been admitted due to an accident. As one of the people listed on her emergency contacts list, they called him as soon as she arrived. However, as he started a panicked run through the tunnel to try and get to the hospital as fast as possible, a villain of all things appeared from the sewers. The villain, who had a slimy body that he was using to suffocate Izuku with, said something about how he wanted to use Izuku's body to walk away free. Izuku was about to be murdered, but he didn't even think about that. All he could think about was the fact that Mom was hurt, and this villain was the only thing keeping him from getting to her. He had never purposefully inflicted jinx on anyone before, but it was easy enough for him to focus its energy on the villain. He couldn't chance just its normal amount of emitted energy to be enough though. With a bit of a struggle, Izuku abandoned fruitlessly trying to clutch at the hold around his neck in order to free his right hand. He snapped his fingers, and the sound echoed throughout the tunnel. It catalyzed the release of Jinx's partially built-up bad luck, inflicting the villain with a heavy curse instantaneously. At that very same moment, one of the dim lights in the tunnel broke off from the ceiling with its wires still attached to land directly on the villain's fluid mass. Its electric current wasn't too potent, but was enough to make both the slime villain and Izuku, who was still stuck in contact with him, shriek in pain. The villain let go of Izuku to dissolve into an unconscious puddle, and Izuku blacked out. When he woke up next, he thought he must be dreaming, because there was no way that he'd ever be lucky enough to have All Might personally save him. His hero went through the motions of making sure Izuku was alright and trying to ask about what had happened to the villain, when Izuku suddenly jolted with the memory of what he was doing before. "Oh gosh, it's really great to meet you, All Might-san, but I've gotta go." Izuku quickly gathered his things and stood up as he was stuttering. He'd have time to freak out over how All Might had signed his notebook later. "And my mom is in the hospital, and I have to go there right away." "Oh dear, I'm sorry to hear that, young man." After a second where All Might glanced to the side to mull over his thoughts, he looked back to Izuku to give him a grin and thumbs up. "Since the villain was already taken care of by the time I got here, I've got a little extra time. If your mother is at the hospital in this area, then I can drop you off in no time before I drop off this guy to be arrested by the police." All Might shook the bottle holding the still unconscious slime villain in demonstration. Izuku's mood instantly brightened up. A real smile lit up his face. "Ah, really? That'd mean so much to me. Thank you so much." All Might simply laughed it off, before taking hold of Izuku. It's a hero's duty to help people in need, no matter how big or small that need is. "Now, I'm on the clock, so there's no time to waste." With that said, they bounded through the air. In only a minute or two, Izuku was placed down in front of the automatic doors of Musutafu General Hospital. And with one last bow, Izuku parted from his hero to check in with the receptionist. Considering his turn of luck in meeting All Might, Izuku had been hopeful about his mother's condition. He shouldn't have been. He was still born unlucky. One fortunate thing happening didn't make that go away. After a long couple of hours waiting, the doctor treating his mom brought him to a private room. She looked down at him with guilt heavy in her eyes. Izuku's dread increased tenfold. "What happened to your mother was a random incident. A drunk driver swerved into the road on a red light when she was in the middle of crossing. Midoriya & Co. was still alive when she was brought in, but her condition was bad. We did everything we could, but the extent of our techniques and quirks can only go so far. Whether a patient makes it through or not sometimes depends on luck. And in this case, luck wasn't with us today." The doctor placed a gentle hand on Izuku's shoulder, and she quietly said, "I'm very sorry for your loss." Izuku wasn't smiling at the time, but he still felt his smile shatter into 1,000 pieces. Just like the mirror from that morning. When Shinsou Itoshi woke up one morning, it had started out as a normal day for him. The foster family that he lived with, which consisted of 3 other foster kids and the foster parents, the Harukas, who decided to open their home for fostering due to lacking their own children, made friendly but wary small talk with Hitoshi during breakfast. Then he and the rest of the kids walked to school, with the 2 kids around his age and headed to the same middle school as he was. They walked ahead of him in their own separate group of friends while he walked alone. This pattern of partial social inclusion where people would superficially interact with him without being interested in risking further contact continued throughout the day. It was hard for people to want to talk to him. They had the mental barrier of being constantly aware that any amount of conversation could potentially lead to him brainwashing them, despite the fact that he'd never use his quirk for bad reasons like that. He's already accepted that that was just how people reacted to his quirk, though. But then things changed up a bit when Hitoshi returned to the household, and the Harukas brought all the kids together for a discussion. We're going to be accepting another foster child soon, as we're the closest family available to where he's going to school. However, there are some details about him you should be aware of, Haruka Nori explained hesitantly, before glancing at her husband to cue him in. Natsume, who was in the same grade but not the same class as him, eyed the two suspiciously. That's almost exactly what you said when Shinsou joined. Is this another kid with a villain quirk? Hitoshi perked up at that, even as the other two children, a boy who was a year younger than him, Fayuki, and an elementary school girl, Aki, became visibly nervous. Ah, Natsume-chan, you shouldn't say stuff like that in front of Shinsou, Hitoshi mentally finished for Haruka Naru when the man took a quick glance at him. He cleared his throat and continued where his wife left off. Midoriya Izuku was only just recently put up for fostering. He's been going through a lot lately, so you shouldn't be rude to him. It's just that he may bring some additional difficulties due to his quirk. It's called Jinx, and it makes bad luck. There's actually a quirk that makes bad luck. Man, that's unlucky. Fayuki looked apprehensive at his own accidental pun. Haruka Nori picked up the conversation again. It's unfortunate for Midoriya-kun, certainly. But what's important here is that all of you are aware that accidents may be more prone around him. And if what happened to his mother is any indication, these accidents may become quite dangerous if we don't approach this cautiously. Hitoshi thought about the warning carefully, until he understood what they were implying. Midoriya used to have a mother, but very obviously did not now, or he wouldn't have been put up for fostering. Outrage broiled in his gut. Eyes sharpening into a glare, he shouted, "You can't seriously be blaming this kid and his quirk for whatever happened to his mom." He couldn't even speak aloud about the chance that a kid would be the cause of their own parents' death just because they had a villain quirk, let alone consider it as a legitimate possibility like these two were. We're not saying it was his quirk. There's no proof of that. Haruka Naru held his hand out as though in surrender, trying to appease Hitoshi. But the fact of the matter is that his quirk causes accidents. And what happened to his mother was a major accident. A car accident is an awful lot of bad luck. If it was his quirk, it certainly wasn't intentional on his part. But regardless if it's just a coincidence or not, we want you kids to be safe around him. Why would you accept someone with a quirk like that in the first place then? Natsume complained while crossing her arms. Because someone has to take him. In the end, he's just another child in need like the rest of you. Haruka Nori tried to give them a kind smile. We'll work around his quirk just like Shinsou's. Things will be fine. Hitoshi couldn't handle it anymore. He abruptly stood up from his seat in one of the dining room chairs to slink back to his room. Little Aki shied away from him in her own seat at the sight of his simmering anger. He muttered to himself while leaving, "There's no way things will be fine if you're talking shit like this behind his back." About a week later, Midoriya Izuku was brought to the family. He had fluffy green curls that matched eyes, and wore a bright smile on his lightly freckled face as he cheerfully introduced himself. Even though they must have met Midoriya a couple of days ago at the very least, the Harukas still seemed relieved at the positive demeanor Midoriya carried himself with, especially when compared to Hitoshi's personality. The rest of the kids seemed to look over him with new considerations in their minds, wondering how a boy like this could have a bad quirk. Hitoshi himself hadn't wanted to get his hopes up that Midoriya might actually want to hang out with him unlike everyone else in the family, but they still formed in his mind anyway. At first the positive attitude had disappointed him, since he assumed it was a sign he was more of a normal person than a villain quirk person. But when Midoriya jumped into an enthusiastic conversation on Hitoshi's quirk as soon as it was mentioned to him, those hopes returned. Midoriya didn't even seem to hesitate when it came to both mentioning Hitoshi's quirk and talking to Hitoshi, like everyone else usually does. He didn't even mind that he had to share his room with someone now due to the limited number of bedrooms, since it was with someone like Midoriya. Midoriya decorated his side of the room with a few different pieces of All Might merchandise and numerous books and notebooks, but other than that it was fairly plain. Hitoshi's side had more character surprisingly, being covered in random cat items combined with Eraserhead merchandise. Overall, it seemed like Midoriya was just another average boy. Then the household got to see Midoriya's quirk in action, and the mood towards him soured. It started with the lights in their room going out. Midoriya just glanced at it, then pulled a handheld flashlight out of nowhere with practiced ease. That was probably me, sorry. I know how to fix the wiring, so you can just stay here, Shinsou-kun. It's no problem, he replied casually. It was nothing more than an inconvenience, really. Then there was the first dinner that featured the crash of a plate breaking on the ground. Midoriya winced while pulling out a dustpan and brushed to sweep it up. After failing to recognize the set, Hitoshi realized that it was Midoriya's pan and brush instead of the Haruka's. I am so sorry. I try to use plastic plates instead occasionally, because of that. Haruka Nori frowned at the broken shards, giving Midoriya an apprehensive glance. Hitoshi could tell she was displeased, but she didn't mention it. It's fine, just be more careful next time, Midoriya-kun. Then Natsume did poorly on her homework. And honestly there was no way that was Midoriya's fault, but she yelled at him for it anyway. I am sorry, but I really make sure to avoid you guys when you're doing school stuff, so that wasn't me. Bullshit. I've never done this bad on an assignment in my life. T has to be you. It really wasn't. Hitoshi put himself between the two of them before the girl could go on any further. Lay off him, Natsume. It's not his fault you suck at algebra. Don't talk to me like that. Creep. Natsume cut herself off and stared aimlessly in Hitoshi's direction when brainwash kicked in. He forcefully pointed towards the hallway that connected the living room to the bedrooms. Go back to your Eniki's room. Natsume did an about-face and followed his instructions. Whoa. Hitoshi turned his head back to see Midoriya looking up at him with shining eyes and a grin. Your quirk is so great, Shinsou-kun. It'd be super useful for a hero to have. You would be able to resolve conflicts without any physical confrontation. In a time where collateral damage is such a major cause of concern for the industry, that's a huge advantage. What did you say? Hitoshi could hardly hear the rest of Midoriya's rambling. He was too focused on how he must have heard that wrong. You mean what I said about the hero industry? Resolving conflicts. How your quirk is great and suited to hero work. That, Hitoshi cut Midoriya off without even knowing what he wanted to say. All he could do was avert his eyes from Midoriya's. No one else thinks that way about it. Oh, I understand that. A hand reached forward to gently hold Hitoshi's. But really, your quirk does have great potential for good, Shinsou-kun. It's not a hindrance like mine is. When Hitoshi turned his eyes back to Midoriya, he was still smiling, but it wasn't like it was just a moment ago. It was a smile that didn't match the dulled, empty look in his once bright green eyes. It was the smile he wore when Natsume yelled at him, or when he dropped his plate, or when the lights went out. It was the same smile he wore on his face every day, even that first day when he first joined the house. The only time he had seen the smile that Midoriya had been wearing previously was when they had that first conversation about Hitoshi's quirk. Oh, it's not that he's actually happy, it's that he's lying. Hitoshi was only able to notice after seeing what Midoriya looked like when his smile was honest. Things continued like that with minor bad luck for a few weeks. Then one morning, Midoriya looked into their bathroom mirror. The mirror completely shattered for no reason. Midoriya's smile changed as he looked into his distorted image. It looked so strained that a person with a knife stuck in their gut might have given a better effort. Haruka Naru came running at the sound of the mirror breaking. What was Midoriya? After seeing no obvious injuries and assessing what happened, the man glared at the still frozen Midoriya. Do you know how much those mirrors cost? Even if you can't help the other stuff, at least try not to do this much damage to our house. Haruka halted his rant when Hitoshi roughly lugged the man out of the bathroom by his arm. When he looked at Hitoshi in surprise, Hitoshi quietly hissed at him. Does it look like he's in the right state of mind to be getting screamed at right now? The man glanced back to Midoriya, who was still just staring into the mirror without any sign of noticing that someone had been shouting at him, and winced. I suppose not. I'll take care of him, so just leave. Okay, Shinsou-kun. You're the one that knows him best. Hitoshi hadn't thought about it like that. He just wanted to get the man out of the way before he could upset Midoriya any further. He hadn't the faintest idea on what to actually do to help him now. When Haruka left, Hitoshi hung in the doorway of the bathroom and called out to Midoriya. When the other didn't acknowledge him, Hitoshi crept into the room to stand beside him and carefully tapped his arm. Midoriya jolted in place and whipped his head to the side to stare at Hitoshi. He dropped his smile and started nervously stuttering. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to break it. I know it's expensive. It's fine, Midoriya. I'm more worried about how you were acting weirdly just now. It's just that. Midoriya trailed off as he glanced back at the broken mirror. Breaking mirrors causing bad luck. When it comes to my quirk, it's more than just a superstition. It's a bad omen. The last time it happened was when it was the day that Mom. Hitoshi caught on. Sympathy welled inside him as he involuntarily winced. He gently wrapped his hand around Midoriya's wrist before Midoriya forced himself to say more. It's okay. You don't need to explain the rest. Midoriya stared at him with a still strained expression before leaving to head back to their room. Hitoshi followed and got there just in time to see Midoriya rummage through a large black box that had been hidden under his bed and pull out an artificial-looking, fuzzy, light purple ornament of some sort that was attached to the chain of a necklace. He presented it to Hitoshi with a fake smile. Can you wear this for the day, Shinsou-kun? Hitoshi accepted the strange necklace, turning it over in his hand as he figured out what it was. Is this a lucky rabbit's foot? Yes, they actually do work. Or at least, they help mitigate the misfortune from my quirk a bit. The last time it happened was when, it was the day that Mom. His chest constricted at what hadn't been said. He grabbed onto Midoriya's upper arms as though to shake sense into him. Midoriya, you didn't. I don't need this. Nothing's gonna happen to me. Your quirk won't. You don't know what's going to happen, so don't say that. Midoriya immediately shut him down with a scream. It was the first time Hitoshi had ever heard him raise his voice or express anger. He looked like he was about to cry. But soon, Midoriya visibly collected himself once again. And Hitoshi couldn't look away from his dull eyes and fake smile. There's no way to know. That's just how it is with things like luck and chance. So, just in case, can you wear that for me, please? Scowling, Hitoshi relented after a long moment of silence, pulling the chain up and around his neck to tuck the rabbit foot charm under his school shirt. Fine, but only for your peace of mind, not because I need it. Midoriya's wilted expression livened up a bit at that. Thanks, Shinsou-kun. I just don't want to take the risk. But then, as Midoriya turned away from Hitoshi to walk out of their room and head towards his middle school, Hitoshi heard him mutter under his breath. Still, it's fitting that happened today of all days, since I already decided that it was going to be a bad day for me. Those words rang through Hitoshi's mind the entire day. What the hell does that mean? Why is he planning on something bad happening? They gave him such an awful feeling. It put him on edge, thinking that tragedy was just around the corner. As soon as the last bell rang, Hitoshi rushed out his classroom and out of the school. But instead of heading towards the Haruka house, he pulled out his phone to look up directions for Midoriya's school and headed straight there. He was so on edge that he felt like he just had to see Midoriya for himself as soon as possible. Waiting at the house wouldn't cut it. By the time he got to Oridori Middle School, it seemed like everyone had left already. There were no straggling kids or teachers leaving from the front doors that Hitoshi could see as he went past the front gate. Then as he got closer, he was able to see a figure on the rooftop. It leaned over the edge with one leg already past the safety barrier. It was impossible to see any features, but Hitoshi could see the color green on them. As soon as he realized what he was witnessing, Hitoshi felt shock cut like a knife through his gut. That was Midoriya. Midoriya was going to jump. He'd never make it up there in time. With a gasping breath, Hitoshi cupped his hands around his mouth, turned his quirk on, and screamed at the top of his lungs. Midoriya. He's not going to answer. They always hesitate. They're always aware of what his quirk can do. He won't. Hitoshi was too far away to hear any response. But his quirk clicked into place with the feeling of a successful brainwashing. The relief that Hitoshi felt was so immense his legs almost gave out. Now that the do-or-die moment had passed, he could feel himself trembling and heaving from shock. But it wasn't over yet. Midoriya was waiting for him. Making sure to keep his quirk in place, Hitoshi sprinted into the building and up flights of stairs that he didn't bother to count. By the time he reached the roof, he was heaving from exhaustion more than he was shock, but that didn't matter. The sight of Midoriya still in the same position halfway over the roof barrier pushed him to continue his sprint onto the rooftop. Get away from the ledge right now. Stand in the middle of the roof. Midoriya moved to comply, lifting his leg back over and walking with steady steps to the center of the roof where Hitoshi met him. It was only after Hitoshi grabbed onto both of Midoriya's wrists. He didn't know if the boy would try to make a run for it over the edge with Hitoshi right there, but he sure as fuck wasn't risking it, that he released brainwashing's hold over him. Midoriya flinched back in surprise once he was in control of himself. After a few seconds spent staring with his mouth agape at Hitoshi, glancing back at where he had been about to hop off the roof, then glancing back at Hitoshi, Midoriya's face screwed up into a somber grimace and he kept his eyes averted. How did you know? I didn't. What you said just gave me a bad feeling. Hitoshi glanced down at where the necklace Midoriya had given him was still hidden under his shirt. I guess that thing really is lucky. I got here just in time. Or I'm still just unlucky, Midoriya deadpanned, grimace twisting up into a sardonic, unhappy smile. Hitoshi's frown deepened. Midoriya, I don't even know what to ask. Just, why? Midoriya still wouldn't look at Hitoshi. Dead green eyes and empty grin focused squarely on the bleak ground beneath them, even as he eventually answered. The day that my mom died, one of my classmates, Katsuki, said that if I wanted a good quirk, I should take a swan dive off the roof and hope for a better one in the next life. Outrage couldn't even describe the mix of fury and disgust that erupted in Hitoshi upon hearing that. But Midoriya didn't give him a moment to think through it before continuing. I had no intention of killing myself when he actually said it, but after I got to the hospital and they told me what happened to her, that it was an accident, and that she needed luck she didn't have to survive. Midoriya broke down even further, unable to keep even a smile of sarcasm as his face visibly fell into despair. Tears began pricking at the corner of his eyes. I knew it was my fault, my quirk's fault. It wasn't your fault. Hitoshi immediate replied. You weren't with her, right? Does your quirk even let you affect things when you're not there? It doesn't, but she's lived with me my whole life. I must have surely cursed her. That doesn't make any sense. You're just assuming the worst because that's what people have told you. Midoriya finally glanced up from the ground, only to give Hitoshi a watery glare. You think it was just a coincidence that a horrible accident happened to the mother of a child who literally brings misfortune everywhere he goes? That she just happened to be at that specific intersection, where that specific drunk driver was going through? That's how it's like for every other person whose parent died like that. I heard Iki's parents died in a car accident also. Do you think that's not a coincidence? That someone cursed them? The sudden revelation threw off Midoriya. After processing what he was told, Midoriya's anger died down to be replaced with sympathy. And no, of course not. But, in this case my quirk is completely irrelevant. You weren't there, so your quirk couldn't have affected anything. End of story. Shit like that just happens. But that's the thing, my entire life is just shit like that happening. Because of my quirk. Midoriya's voice broke, and the dam holding back his tears broke with it. The wrist Hitoshi was still holding trembled violently. Midoriya's next sentences came out more like sobs. It's just one bad thing after the next. It gets in my and everyone else's way. No one wants to sit next to me during tests. No one wants me on their team during contests or competitions. Everyone knows I'll just sabotage them if they interact with me. Even Katsuki didn't want anything to do with me after he got hurt in an accident caused by my quirk. And the only person that wanted to be with me, the only person that loved me, died in an accident that was probably caused by my quirk. I don't think I'll be reborn and get a different quirk if I jump. I just can't handle it anymore. It's too hard. Watching the sobbing and grieving boy in front of him break into pieces. Just like the mirror from that morning, Hitoshi's heart echoed Midoriya's pain. He wasn't a touchy-feely person, but pulling Midoriya closer into a firm hug came naturally. Face pressed into Hitoshi's shoulder, Midoriya shook in his arms. Hitoshi couldn't stand seeing him like this. He needed to do something to help. But how do you give back someone's will to life? That kind of thing just can't be given. I'm sorry for everything, Midoriya. Hitoshi tried to find something. Anything that Midoriya could latch onto. Isn't there anything you want to do with your life though? Any dream you have? And don't discount stuff people say you can't do. A cracking hiccup answered him. I wanted to be a hero. If I just used jinx on villains instead of myself, then it'd be fine. But I can't even save myself. I can't be a hero and save other people. And even more than that, it's just not enough anymore. Midoriya's fingers grasped hard at Hitoshi's back. Being a hero was everything I ever wanted, but that's not enough. A fleeting hope isn't worth this. It can't fill the loneliness or the hole where mom used to be. I can't use that as a reason to want to stay. He can't find his own reason, fine. Hitoshi will have to give him one for now, so that he can be sure Midoriya won't try to off himself as soon as he looks away. Midoriya finding his own reason can come after that. But what is there for Hitoshi to give him? He doesn't have anything to give in the first place, other than himself. It's probably not a healthy solution, but it's the only thing Hitoshi had to offer at the moment. I always wanted to be a hero too. That's why I'm applying to UA. Even though a person with a quirk like mine becoming a hero is such a long shot, it's gonna be a hard road for me. Outnumbered by hero in training kids with flashy, good quirks, having to prove myself twice as much as them. You said before that you think my quirk would be a good quirk for a hero. Do you think that I could be a good hero? Do you want me to be a hero? Those questions, seemingly unrelated to Midoriya's mental state, helped to calm him down. Midoriya only had a slight sniffle when he answered, "Of course. I think you would be a great hero, so I would want you to be a hero if that's also what you wanted." Hitoshi pulled away slightly, so that Midoriya was forced to look up at his hard stare. "Then if you really don't have anything else to do with your life other than give up on it, if you don't have a good enough reason to stay, why don't you just dedicate it to me instead?" Midoriya furrowed his brows in confusion. What do you mean? I mean that. With all the problems I'm going to have to deal with trying to be a hero, I'd be nice to have someone by my side to help me out. You can be a hero, so even if you can't believe in your own dream anymore, this wouldn't be just about that. You'd be helping me reach my dream if we both helped each other out trying to become heroes together. And if we're together facing similar prejudice, then you won't be alone anymore either. Let me be your reason. In the end, it didn't matter what exactly Midoriya stuck around for. As long as he was alive, he could eventually live for himself as he should. But Hitoshi almost couldn't believe what he was saying. He's never been confident about his chances for becoming a hero. He hasn't been worth much to anyone since his dad died. And yet here he is claiming that helping him become a hero is worth something. That even if Midoriya didn't value his own life, Hitoshi's was something he should value enough to live for. How much more conceited could you get? He's never asked this much from anyone before. He's never been so bold before, and yet here he is. All because he didn't have anything better to give Midoriya. Midoriya's still watery eyes started to shine. You would really promise so much to me. Commit to staying with me. When you could just hand me off to be put on suicide watch instead. Hitoshi gained a slight but dark scowl. I don't trust any of the authority figures we usually have to deal with to actually inspire you to want to live, rather than just physically keeping you from dying. Society doesn't deal well with people who have the kind of quirks we do. I don't know how much of a better job I can do, but surely I do better than that. But you really don't need to do any of this at all. You barely know me, so why would you go so far for me? I think whether or not you know a person is irrelevant when you're trying to save someone. And I don't like that you want to die. You understand me and actually talk to me. I'd miss you if you were gone. It was embarrassing to speak so honestly, but it needed to be said. Midoriya needed to know that there was at least one person who'd mourn for him, that wanted him to stay. Midoriya stared at him with something close to bewilderment. Then after a long, nervous moment of silence, he smeared away his tear streaks and gave a wobbly, okay as in, I won't try again. And I'll help you become a hero. The last sentence was declared with pride. Midoriya stood up a little straighter, earnest determination filling him. If it's for someone else's sake, then I think I can do it, Shinsou-kun. Hitoshi sighed in relief. That's good. Also, you can call me Hitoshi. If an extremely personal situation like this isn't enough to elevate someone to a first name status, then you can call me Izuku. Midoriya. Izuku glanced away before looking back awkwardly. Does this mean we're friends now? I was under the assumption that we were already friends. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. I think of us as being friends too. I just didn't want to assume. Calm down, it's fine. I get what you mean. Not a lot of people want to be my friend either. Then they're missing out on a lot. Izuku almost seemed to pout at that, turning his nose up at the theoretical people in question. The corner of Hitoshi's mouth quirked up at the warm feeling those words gave him. They're missing out on a lot with you, too. Despite the dour circumstances, by all appearances it was just another day. The sun was shining. The birds in the distant trees were singing. The leaves of the treetops that could be seen from their spot on the bland roof were so green, it would make some people stop just to appreciate them longer. Maybe the reason why Hitoshi had been able to get here in time was because Izuku had done just that. In any case, the brightness of their surroundings didn't match their moods. Izuku may have been stopped, and may have agreed to not try again. But that didn't mean he still didn't feel suicidal. It didn't mean he felt any better or didn't blame himself for things that weren't his fault. It didn't mean that any of this was over. On the contrary, it was really just the beginning. But even though Izuku wasn't smiling anymore, the more natural, neutral expression he now had made his face seem brighter than it had been before. Things were awkward and tense after Izuku's failed attempt. He begged Hitoshi not to tell the Haruka family about it, so all they could do once they got back to the house was pretend like it didn't happen. Izuku went back to his default smile, which Hitoshi seemed displeased with. The two of them were painfully silent at dinner, and Hitoshi almost started a fight when Natsume tried to approach Izuku about something. They only began talking to one another again after reaching the relative privacy of their room. Hitoshi looked like he wanted to say something, so Izuku waited patiently for him to figure out how he wanted to start. You remember how I told you about all the details of my quirk when you first got here? Of course, I kept notes of everything. That had been an exciting day. Izuku had been fascinated about the mechanics behind brainwashing. Hitoshi explained how his quirk required the target to give a verbal response, which Izuku had done on the roof when he exclaimed Hitoshi's name in shock upon hearing him. He also needed to concentrate on a person when brainwashing them, so while he could brainwash multiple people, he could only do so one at a time. The brainwashing went away either when he willed it away or when a physical jolt of some sort took them out of it. Izuku thought it was a very effective quirk as long as Hitoshi had the element of surprise. Hitoshi glanced away in almost a nervous manner, before he steeled himself up and gave Izuku a serious stare. Well, I was thinking that maybe I should learn more about your quirk too. He tensed at Hitoshi's suggestion. The only people that had ever really tried to learn about Jinx had been his mother and the quirk counselor that had been assigned to him when his quirk first appeared. I never brought it up because it seemed like a sore topic. But having a second opinion might help you with using it. Hitoshi scowled a bit as he moved on to complain. I know problem quirks like ours usually have to be evaluated by a quirk counselor to advise us on how to use it in the future. But my counselor only really said to just never use it in the first place. That's not going to cut it for us. Apprehensive, Izuku tried to keep a smile on his face as he slowly questioned, Do I really need to use my quirk? You said yourself that you can use it on villains, so I don't see why you shouldn't use it. It's just that sometimes the effects can be random, I guess you'd say. If I don't have an effect in mind when using it, it just does what it wants. Izuku looked down at his shirt while fiddling with its hem, and began his nervous muttering. My quirk produces a constant amount of energy which takes the form of bad luck, so I can't stop producing it. I can withhold expelling it, but it builds up over time. This is a disadvantage if I don't want it to cause luck that's too bad. About that, what exactly does it mean to have bad luck from your quirk? Like, luck isn't supposed to be a physical thing, but you're describing it as energy. It had been a while since Izuku got to think about his quirk in a technical way. Mom had already known everything, so his musings were mostly confined to notebooks. It made him a bit more willing to speak about it. Jinx produces energy that increases the probability of a bad event occurring. with what's considered bad being defined by the target if the target has sentience. For example, Izuku searched his mind before raising a single finger. Scenario 1. If I were to just mindlessly direct the energy towards a villain running away, any number of small misfortunes that already had the possibility of happening might occur, such as the villain tripping and thus slowing down, the villain dropping what they're trying to steal, etc. Izuku raised a second finger. Scenario 2. If I directed energy towards the same villain, but specifically wanted them to trip, then they would trip instead of any of the other possibilities happening. However, this won't work if the event I'm trying to make happen would be considered a good thing by the villain. Like if I was trying to trip a hero going after the villain without switching targets to said hero, or if the event is too unlikely for the amount of energy I'm using. If I'm using a small amount of energy, Jinx wouldn't be able to affect things enough to pull off something like the police arriving a full 30 minutes earlier than they would have. The tricky part when it comes to regulating my quirk's output is that it will automatically take the energy it needs for what I have in mind, so I could end up using a ton of energy at once by accident. He finished off while scratching at his cheek. Hitoshi glanced away and thought for a moment, before focusing back on Izuku to state for clarification. But you would be able to get around those things if you used your quirk on the hero instead, or if you had more energy available. Yes to both. But the police arriving early is an event that would actually require a lot of things to happen. Stuff like the traffic towards the incident lightening up by a lot. The traffic lights not turning red on them a lot so they don't have to slow down to force their way through an intersection. Maybe even a hero that can assist them in going faster showing up. Therefore, it's an event that would require a lot of energy to make happen. I can build up more energy by not using my quirk. But if it's simply impossible no matter what happens for the police to make it that early, then it can't happen either way. Additionally, the energy seems to have its own destructive properties, so events where objects break or malfunction have lower energy requirements. Your quirk actually has a scientific basis then. It's not as supernatural as it sounds. The corner of Izuku's mouth quirked up into half a real smile, and waved his hand in a so-so manner. It has a logical foundation if you know how it works, but it's not completely scientific, I'd say. There should be no reason for things involved with superstition to affect it if that were the case. But those things do have an effect. Right, how does that work then? Hitoshi asked while fiddling with the rabbit's foot charm. He had yet to take it off. Basically, things that are thought to be lucky make it harder for a bad event to occur. So more energy would be required for the same event if my target had a luck-inducing item. If I wear the lucky item, then my quirk produces less energy than normal. Things that are thought to be unlucky will amplify the bad luck. So if I'm wearing something like that, my quirk will produce more energy, or if my target is wearing it, then less energy would be required for the same event to occur. Also, these objects usually carry their own residual bad luck that I can sense, but I can't sense any opposing energy that can be called good luck. This applies to actions that are thought to cause good or bad luck as well, such as breaking a mirror. Izuku stumbled over that particular omen. The half-smile on his face dropped. They have an accumulative effect too, so the more unlucky items I have or actions I'm performing, the more energy I accumulate. You have a very thorough understanding for someone who dislikes their quirk. Well, I've had to work around it my whole life, so I just picked up all of this and took note of it. Fidgeting in embarrassment, Izuku unconsciously glanced at his bed away from Hitoshi and admitted, I also find the superstitious aspect to be sort of fascinating. So I studied it and experimented with it a bit. I guess you could say I'm a bit of an enthusiast for both the blessed and the cursed. After his quirk developed when he was younger, he had a blast learning cursed things. When he had first read up on pagan and satanic symbols, his mom, bless her soul, had taken one look at his bright eyes when he mumbled through a 5-year-old's explanation of the significance of a pentagram, and bought him his first pentagram medallion the next day despite it boosting his quirk. She had told him that misfortune was a small price to pay for his happiness. And look at where that got her. He knew they were supposed to be bad and strange, but he felt a certain attraction to it. He was just the kind of person that when looking at a skull and crossbones picture, instead of making the mental socially taught connection to danger, he would first think, wow, that's neat. It had been disconcerting to realize that most people didn't feel the same way he did about cursed things. That a cult was supposed to only be for the fringe of society. Some would either choose to follow the order of society and ignore it, or rebel against the institution and embrace it. Alternatively, his interest in blessed religious objects was usually received positively. But he supposed by its very nature, that was just what it was meant to be. If superstitions were universally believed, then they wouldn't be superstition anymore. They'd be declared either science or religion. Like how Wicca is supposed to be a religion, but it's considered as more of an occult interest because it isn't widely accepted. However, that was a debate best left to inconsequential internet forums. To Izuku's delight, Hitoshi affirmed his feelings by responding, I guess that makes sense, yeah. There's a lot of stuff that would go into it since that's decided by culture. How does that even work? Hitoshi furrowed his brows in confusion. Do superstitions from other places apply? That's a great question. Izuku beamed at his friends. Gosh, he has a friend now that he can talk about his interests to. It's so surreal. It seems like superstitions from all over have an effect. It gets particularly confusing when they conflict with each other, like how Japan and various other countries believe black cats are good luck. But for various Western countries, they're bad luck. So what are they for your quirk, good or bad luck? I think it depends on the personality. The personality of the cat, Izuku clarified. The ones that are nice to me are bad luck, and the ones that avoid me are good luck. So maybe it's more how they view me as a result of their luck rather than it being personality-based. In that case, I have no idea how it's decided. Hitoshi rose his eyebrows in incredulous disbelief. What the hell? That's just confusing. I know. I used to search out different black cats to try and see if more were bad luck versus good luck. And it was literally a 50/50 split. Izuku walked up to the small bookshelf on his side of the room and picked out one of the many notebooks he stored there, a medium-sized black one that he used for Jinx-related investigation. He flipped through it to point at a page to Hitoshi. I found 66 cats, and 34 had bad luck energy and came up to me to let me pet them, and 32 hissed at me when I got close and ran away. As a control, cats with a tortoise shell coated are always lucky, so they always ran away. And normal cats varied but were mostly neutral towards me. Hitoshi took the notebook to glance over the page. Then, he started to leaf through the other pages in curiosity. You've got a lot of notes here. He trailed off once he closed the notebook to look at the cover and pointed at the red ink marring the black with a raised eyebrow. Is that a pentagram? Izuku flushed a bit at the drawing and cleared his throat before saying, well, pagan symbols are often associated with witchcraft and some are bad luck. In the context of Wicca, pentagrams are more of a neutral force with different interpretations, but because society associates witchcraft with being bad, this makes it slightly unlucky. An upside-down or inverted pentagram, as it's called, is considered a satanic symbol, and those are all major bad luck according to my quirk for the same reason. Horseshoes and Christian crosses are like that too. Actually, right side up it's good luck, but if they're inverted it's bad luck. For horseshoes it's said that the luck will fall out that way, and an inverted cross is also a satanic symbol. Wait, so if I hold it like this? Izuku watched as Hitoshi turned the notebook upside down, causing the amount of energy he could feel coming off it to increase. Then it's even more unlucky. Yes, exactly. That's kinda weird, but it's also kinda cool. Izuku's breath caught in his throat at that. No one had ever called his quirk cool before. Do you have more of this kind of stuff? Hitoshi glanced down at where Izuku's black box was hidden under his bed. With great hesitation, Izuku bent down to take it out and reveal its contents. It was a plain-looking box, but the inside was anything but. All sorts of random occult-related or spiritual talismans were inside, from good omens to bad. Among the most prevalent were his dreamcatcher, bags of salt, horseshoes, crosses, omikuji New Year fortunes, amamori protective amulets, Western Wiccan talismans, satanic charms, and of course, fake rabbit's feet. Izuku fidgeted in place slightly. I usually put some of this stuff around my room to help ward off my own bad luck. But it's sort of a weird thing to do, so. Izuku. Hitoshi placed a hand on his shoulder, causing him to flinch a little, and gave him a serious look. I couldn't care less about how you decorate your side of the room. You could literally put a picture of Satan up and I wouldn't care. Go for it. Once Izuku realized Hitoshi was being genuine, a true smile bloomed on his face. The two of them worked together to hang up a horseshoe right side up so that it was in a U shape on the wall next to Izuku's bookcase, along with a large cross and a great blessing omikuji. Izuku had to stop for a moment to look at it fondly. The black painted kanji on stark white paper was familiar. I can never manage to pick out these fortunes. I barely get the smaller blessings even when I turn my quirk off. This is one Mom gave to me. She'd get them more than just New Year's time though, so I think she was just making them herself. Catching a glimpse of Hitoshi frowning at him, Izuku realized he wasn't smiling anymore and forced a smile back on his face. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring down the mood. Izuku, it's okay to be sad. Thank you for telling me about your mom. Hitoshi placed a hand on his shoulder, but when Izuku looked at him, his gaze was averted. I know I haven't said anything about how I ended up here, but you could probably guess. I only had my dad cause my mom didn't want anything to do with me. And he left before his time when he got sick. That kind of pain. It's not something you can ignore. Thank you, Hitoshi-kun. It's okay to be sad. He had never thought about it like that before. It was all about staying strong, keeping a smile on and your spirits up even when things get rough. That's how All Might did it, at least. And Izuku had always wanted to be like All Might. But isn't it pointless to try to emulate All Might when Izuku was the furthest thing from him, outside of outright being a villain? Izuku dealt with this internal problem the way he dealt with all his internal problems, by pretending it wasn't there. He had Hitoshi move on to helping him put up a dreamcatcher made with delicate string and artificial light green feathers and beads over his bed, explaining Jinx would sometimes give him bad dreams if he didn't stop it from releasing energy before he fell asleep. Often he purposefully kept it running though, as bad dreams were a safer outlet for the bad luck than having to let out more in the morning because it built up. He promised that he would make one for Hitoshi, too. There's no need for that. Also, you should probably get used to building it up on purpose now. It will help a lot in hero training if you have more to use, right? That made Izuku pause. He glanced at Hitoshi's earnest purple eyes before looking down at his All Might covers. The fake All Might's face was in a wide smile as always. Hitoshi-kun, are you really sure I should try to become a hero, especially by trying to get into UA? There was silence. Then Hitoshi gently took his hand. Izuku looked up in surprise as Hitoshi led him to his side of the room and guided him into sitting down on Hitoshi's cat paw-covered bed. Hitoshi sat down beside him, and only then released his hand and asked, "Why are you asking that?" "Well, not only am I still uneasy about using Jinx, but UA is a very competitive school, you know." Izuku empathetically gestured his hand towards his friend. "If I try to get a spot in the heroics program, that just means there's one less spot for you. I want to help you become a hero, not be a hindrance." Hitoshi looked up at the ceiling, sighing quietly, before turning his purple eyes back to Izuku. "I think that later in life, you're going to regret not trying, so I want you to go for your best chance at it while you can. And I'm going to be real with you, Izuku. The chance of me getting into the hero program by passing the entrance exam is probably very low." "Huh, why do you think so? Other than, basic probability." UA keeps quiet about the actual contents of the practical exam. But one thing that's general knowledge is that it's combat-based, and that flashy, physical quirks have the greatest advantage. Eraserhead is on their staff, and one of the only things that's known by the media about him is that he's against the setup of the exam because of this. Eraserhead himself wasn't able to get into the heroics department until later because of that. Oh, I do remember reading about that online, actually. So you don't think brainwashing will do you any good for the exam because of that? Izuku scowled down at his lap. When it came to other people's misfortune, he never tried faking a smile. He glimpsed at Hitoshi's face out of the corner of his eye. His friend looked unhappy with what they were talking about, his eyebrows furrowed with frustration. It made Izuku mutter out loud, "It's ridiculous though. Your quirk is great at anti-personnel conflict, and dealing with villains is a major job for heroes. Just because you aren't blowing stuff up doesn't mean it's not an effective hero quirk." Hitoshi stared at him for a second, stunned the same way he had been when Izuku had mentioned this previously, before his face relaxed and the corners of his mouth came up in a small smile. The sight of it made Izuku feel a little warmer, happy that he was able to help Hitoshi be happier. I know that, and you know that, we just have to show them. I've already accepted that I'll have to get into the program after being accepted, though I'll still apply for it just in case. Leave that part to me." The knuckles of Hitoshi's right hand knocked against Izuku's thigh and he nodded his head to the side towards Izuku. "Where you come in is that I suspect your quirk might have a better chance at the exam." Really? But it's not. It's not what people would call a hero's quirk, but it has an actual physical effect on stuff. The only way my quirk helps me is if I'm against a person. You don't have that limitation." Face screwing up, Izuku mumbled, "Yeah, but that's only because it destroys stuff. And there are plenty of heroes whose quirks destroy stuff. Just look at All Might." Hitoshi pointed at Izuku's own All Might poster. "His quirk can literally demolish buildings, and he's number one. Regardless of the bad image associated with bad luck making it a villain quirk, your quirk still has the advantage that destructive quirks are usually favored for combat." "I never thought about it like that. But all that means is that I might get into the program while you don't." "But that's a good thing if I don't get in," Hitoshi explained. "That means that you can learn at the pace of the rest of the heroic students and help me catch up with the material I'm missing. Since UA is such a tough program, there'll probably be at least one student in our year that gets dropped. Just make sure that it's not you and we'll be good." Oh, I get it now. That's actually a pretty good idea." Izuku cupped his chin as he turned the plan over in his mind. And while he didn't mention it, Hitoshi's mention of Izuku not getting dropped made him realize that he could do that on purpose. If it looks like no one's getting booted and Hitoshi caught the teacher's eyes enough to get transferred, Izuku could just bow out and transfer to general education. It was the perfect way to clear a spot for Hitoshi. Of course, Hitoshi wouldn't accept that plan, so Izuku couldn't talk about it with him. But in his eyes it was a definite option. It also would only work if Izuku got accepted through the entrance exam. Izuku smiled at the boy next to him. "In that case, I'll definitely try to get in so I can help you, Hitoshi-kun." To his confusion, instead of smiling back, Hitoshi frowned at him. "Listen, clearly, smiling is supposed to be your thing. But when you're with me I only want you to smile when you actually mean it. I don't like it when you feel like you need to pretend to be happy. Just be honest with me, I can take it." Oh, Izuku let his smile drop. His expression twisted to match the dissatisfaction he felt for himself. Okay, I don't know how well I'll be able to do that, though. That's just what I always do. That's fine. Just do your best to break the habit. That's all I need. Hitoshi patted his knee, and his face relaxed into a more neutral expression. Hitoshi seemed pleased to see it. So while we're still sharing, are there any more boxes hidden under your bed full of unusual objects or anything like that? Hitoshi joked with him, but it just made Izuku's face flush with embarrassment. Well, actually, it's not anything like that, but Hitoshi raised his eyebrows. Oh, come on now. Don't just leave it at that. With stiff movements, Izuku walked over to his good-sized clothing dresser with Hitoshi following in curiosity. He opened a drawer on the right side. It was filled with colorful clothing and t-shirts that were labeled with the names of other shirts. I've seen you wear those plenty of times. Yeah. Yes, well, these are my clothes for when I'm trying hard to put up a strong front, you know. And these? Izuku opened a drawer on the left side. The only discernible feature that could be seen was black, are for when I'm feeling honest with myself, which is never nowadays, he didn't add on. Well, black's a good color on a lot of people. But you're very compartmentalized about this. Hitoshi gave Izuku a once-over out of the corner of his eye, probably thinking about how Izuku's coping mechanisms weren't very good. That was already obvious though, or he wouldn't have had to stop Izuku from jumping off a building. Hitoshi hummed a bit, then shrugged. Well, if you wear black when you're being honest, then wear more black when we hang out. Izuku's head swerved to the side to give Hitoshi a surprised look. You want to hang out with me? Yeah, I thought we already covered this with the friend thing. Alright, the last time I hung out with someone was when I was in daycare though. What do people do when they hang out? Hitoshi shrugged, but from the way his mouth pinched and his shoulders became hunched, Izuku though he might be a little embarrassed. Fuck if I know. I haven't hung out with anyone since I got my quirk. The two of us are really well suited for each other. With a chuckle that was more like a snort, Hitoshi smirked and drawled. That's certainly one way to put it, yeah. Both of us can be hopeless together now. Izuku gave his own chuckle at that, and he found the corner of his mouth curling up into a slight but real smile. They talked for a while after that about everything and nothing, until they suddenly remembered that just because Izuku had almost died that day didn't mean they no longer had homework. Then they switched to rushing through their worksheets and books at their designated desks. It was sort of sad, but Izuku appreciated the distraction. While Izuku had often noticed that the Harukas had a hard time interacting with him and Hitoshi, they didn't skimp on providing them with everything a child going through school would need. And they didn't punish Izuku whenever he accidentally broke something with his quirk. When Izuku had first realized he was being put up for fostering, he had assumed that he would end up in a much worse situation. So that combined with being able to meet Hitoshi made this whole experience a pleasant surprise. But he still wished that he could go back in time to have his mom back. Going back to school the next day was horrible. He might as well have stitched a smile into his face for how stiff and forced it felt. He hadn't been able to look Katsuki in the eye ever since that day when Izuku had first decided to go through with his suggestion, and he hadn't been able to think of him as Kaken anymore. There was just something about this whole scenario that made Izuku feel more emotionally distant from his old friend that his outright bullying hadn't been able to achieve previously. Even when Katsuki had hurt him with his quirk before, Izuku hadn't taken his animosity to heart. It was only after Katsuki told him to kill himself without even caring what effect his words might have. It was only after realizing that he does want to die and what Katsuki's words had done to Izuku's self-worth that Izuku took it to heart. While Katsuki probably noticed his increased avoidance, Izuku reminded himself to call him Kaken every time they spoke, or rather, every time that Katsuki growled at him to complain about what Izuku was doing, so he didn't think Katsuki realized that something had gone horribly wrong with Izuku's life. The only people at school who knew about what happened to his mom were the teachers, who had all become more sympathetic with him. His homeroom teacher had even pulled him over in the beginning to say that they would all be more forgiving about missed assignments and such, though Izuku hadn't taken them up on that so far. Deep inside of him, he hated the way that pity seemed to roll off them in waves around him. Whereas Izuku's classmates had always been disdainful of his quirk, the adults were more likely to react with pity. Before it had been slight enough to ignore, but now it was almost unbearable. His days seemed to cycle back and forth from being in heaven and hell, where he would have to endure his lonely, suffocating hours at school to reach the end of the day and get to go back to Hitoshi, only to have to start the whole thing all over again the next day. It was better than when it had just been hell, but he couldn't help but question if the heaven was really worth it. He still feels like before, even with Hitoshi there. The thought of wouldn't things be much easier if I just didn't have to deal with it at all crossed his mind whenever he stared out his classroom window too long. But then a few hours later he'd get to see Hitoshi again, and he would remember how good it felt to be with him. He would remember that he had a reason to try now. With Hitoshi's input, Izuku planned a UA preparation regime for the both of them. While their quirks may not be exactly what UA was looking for, that didn't mean they couldn't be physically prepared to handle the program. It wasn't too much, just some basic exercises like running and weight training to build strength and endurance. But hopefully it would keep them from being total embarrassments at least. So the days passed by with the two of them training both their brains and bodies for the entrance exam. And with Izuku trying his best to focus on his studies at school and block everyone else out. Days turned into weeks turned into months, which turned into whole season, and soon, the day of UAS entrance exam was upon them. Of course, Hitoshi had them apply to other schools as well, as UA was notoriously hard to get into too. Izuku wasn't as concerned about planning for his potential future, since he was still getting used to the idea of attempting to have a future in the first place, so he was thankful that Hitoshi was practical enough for both of them on that front. That being said, UA was still what they had been working for, and Izuku knew that if Hitoshi didn't get into either heroics or general education, then his friend would be very disappointed. He also knew being friends with a walking bad luck charm would also hurt his chances, though Hitoshi always denied it when Izuku brought it up. Izuku was glad that Hitoshi had taken a liking to the rabbit's foot he gifted him though, as he always wore it around. That made Izuku feel a little less worried about his quirk causing Hitoshi an accident. However, for a full 2 weeks before the exam, Izuku had been storing all of the energy Jinx produced to build it up for the exam day. By the time the exam was upon them, the malevolent, cursed energy seemed to swirl around beneath his skin, unseen but felt in the goosebumps and standing hair on the back of his neck. It made him more of a nervous wreck than usual, and forced the masking smile on his face to become more strained with each day that passed. He was worried about what would happen once he let it out, even though he knew as long as he was careful with how he directed it that things should be alright. He was nervous about unintentionally sabotaging his friend. He was nervous about unintentionally killing his friend. But he knew that Hitoshi wouldn't want to hear that, so he didn't mention it. As it turned out, there was one thing that he hadn't even thought to be worried of that in hindsight he really should have been, because it was a thing that actually had a high probability of happening due to Izuku's luck. And it did happen. What the hell are you doing here, Deku? Didn't I tell you not to bother with trying for UA? A smile was instantly etched into his face, but he kept his eyes demurely on Katsuki's approaching feet. "Ah, Kaken, do you have a problem with us, bastard?" Hitoshi's voice, deepened further than usual with anger, cut into the conversation with deadly precision. It made Izuku think of an executioner preparing his guillotine's blade. Izuku found the nerve to glance up, and caught sight of the equaling piercing glare Hitoshi was giving Katsuki. "Who the fuck are you? Stay out of this." Katsuki's shouting suddenly cut off as brainwashing took hold of his mind. Hitoshi pointed at UAS shiny, window-covered and weirdly shaped building, where countless examinees were filing into. "Go get ready for the exam and leave us alone." Much like Natsume had that one day, Katsuki walked past them and towards the entrance without a word. Izuku noticed that Hitoshi continued to glare at Katsuki as he watched the other walk away. His friend took a deep breath, gave a long exhale, then asked Izuku without looking away from Katsuki, "Is that the guy you were talking about?" What? "The guy that told you to kill yourself." Katsuki, Kaken, he spat the name out like it curdled in his mouth. Izuku flinched back at both his tone and the question. After a full minute of silence, Hitoshi turned his eyes back to Izuku. Something he found in Izuku's face made him soften and relent. "I won't do anything about him if you don't want me to, I just want to know." Izuku hesitated, then nodded wordlessly. Hitoshi's eyes darkened, and his jaw visibly clenched. "Do you think he's gonna get in?" "Without a doubt." "Fuck. Well, if he gets to be too much of a problem, I'm dealing with him one way or another." While Izuku knew Hitoshi didn't mean it like that, he sounded remarkably like a villain planning murder with that statement. "I don't want to ruin his future." Hitoshi cut him off. "In my eyes he ruined his own future. But as long as you're not in danger, I won't mention anything to the teachers. They may be heroes, but the only one I'd really trust not to just take his side by default is Eraserhead. I think UAS staff are all of a higher caliber, and All Might's teaching this year too, you know. So you want me to tell them?" At Izuku's flinching grimace, Hitoshi sighed. "Yeah, that's what I thought. You still hadn't taken that fake smile off your face though, so at least that's gone now." "Oh, really? I hadn't actually noticed." "That's fine. We'll get there eventually." Hitoshi patted Izuku on the shoulder, then guided Izuku into walking forward again. When he stumbled a bit into what would have turned into one of his usual face plants, Hitoshi's hand kept him steady. It was only then that he realized that Hitoshi said "we'll get there," as in he would be working together with Izuku on it. He had also used us when talking to Katsuki, implying that any problem Katsuki had with Izuku would have to include Hitoshi. Even though they had spent all this time working together and Izuku's new goal was helping Hitoshi become a hero, it was only now that he fully realized that the two of them were in this together. Concerning both UA and life, Hitoshi had devoted himself to Izuku, just as Izuku had promised to do for him. Thinking about that gave him such a wonderful feeling. It also reinforced Izuku's desire to get into the hero program, just so that he could give his spot to Hitoshi later. Hitoshi's hunch about the practical was proved correct. In the huge auditorium, President Mike announced they would be fighting villain robots for points, a task that was actually perfect for Jinx, no human endangerment required. But Izuku couldn't feel lucky about it, as brainwashing would be worthless against them, and Hitoshi's misfortune was Izuku's misfortune. Hitoshi still had a soured expression even after President Mike's explanation was already over that pained Izuku's chest. But after a deep breath, he seemed to momentarily let go of his bitterness to give Izuku a reassuring expression. With a pat on Izuku's shoulder, something that he noticed was becoming a trend, Hitoshi nodded and said, "Give those robots hell for me." After a moment of hesitation, Izuku nervously brought his own hand up to squeeze Hitoshi's. I'll do my best." They were sent to separate miniature cities that would act as their exam area. Anxiety twisted up his insides, and the bad luck within them at seeing just how many competitors he would be sharing the field with, even when it was only a seventh of his competition. To think that among these hundreds, maybe thousands, of kids, only 40 would get the honor of UAS Heroics program, even with his quirk being suited for this task. Izuku couldn't deny that all his classmates had been right to say you need luck to get in. And begin. What's wrong? The test already started. You don't get countdowns in real life. President Mike shouted through the speakers. Chaos erupted as the massive examinees ran into the city all at once. Izuku's hesitation cost him. The rush of people forcing themselves past him made him stumble and lag behind the crowd. But once he was in, things were fairly simple. Upon encountering his first villain bot, Izuku just snapped his fingers with the wish for it to break. A good chunk of bad luck, but still a small portion compared to well of misfortune inside him, was used up as the tire on the robot popped with a hole. It promptly tripped over its own wheel. It was a small one, probably a one-pointer, but was still a big enough size that it fell hard. Its facsimile of a head snapped right off when the neck made contact with the hard concrete. What are you gonna do? Win fights by making the villains trip over themselves? Well, at least one thing Katsuki said to him was a good idea. He ran through the city like that, snapping his fingers whenever a robot entered his field of vision. Everyone was scurrying around like ants looking for carcasses to scavenge. All Izuku needed was to see a robot and snap his fingers, so he should be one of the fastest there in terms of taking out robots. But there were just so many competitors taking their own points left and right that it was difficult to just find a free robot in and of itself, especially since his quirk couldn't help him get around faster. It made him doubt that he'd take out enough within the span of only 10 minutes. He wasn't specific about how his luck should break them unless there was another person nearby the robot that could get hurt or act as a possible choice for breaking the robot. This increased the amount of options that could occur and therefore increased the probability of the event occurring, thus used less energy from his quirk. It also led to some rather random ways of robot destruction. Most often was a simple short fuse that led to the robot powering down, or the robot tripping and breaking. Then there were robots that exploded, presumably by some internal malfunction that Izuku had no idea. Some of them faced their death by the debris made by other robots crushing them. The ground outright collapsed under one robot, probably his fourth robot, as the bad luck associated with the number of death would help boost his bad luck. That Izuku presumed got destroyed upon landing, but couldn't confirm due to how deep the hole was. How did that even form? In comparison, his lucky seventh snap was much weaker than average. A non-essential part of the robot broke. Ironically, the increase in luck was unlucky for him, as the robot was already upon him. He froze up at the thought of how much it will hurt to get hit by it. But then the robot started float into the air, only to crash down to earth unceremoniously. "Release," panted a girl with short brown hair. She had been behind the villain bot. She rushed up to him and asked, "Are you all right?" Izuku stared at her stupidly. "Why, yeah, thank you. It's no problem. Be more careful, okay?" With that said, she rushed off. He had to force himself to move on to searching for his next target. There was just no time to contemplate how someone had actually paused in the middle of an important exam to help him like that, though she did benefit from it by destroying the villain bot. Come to think of it, these robots are probably supposed to be really sturdy. You would expect more situations like snap number 7 to happen. Jinx must be causing them to hit their more delicate parts or something. The most memorable robot death was when he was stuck between two bullet-shooting villain bots and used his snap to curse both at once. He tripped on a crack at the same time they both shot at him, causing them to fire on each other instead. But one thing that had caught Izuku's attention throughout this was there was an inexplicable change in weather that contradicted the weather report's predictions. Upon his sixth snap, the devil's number, also unlucky, dark clouds moved in overhead, and they seemed to get darker with each snap. Upon his 10th snap, they started to crackle with thunder. Was that him? He had never used so much bad luck at once before, admittedly, but to think the effect on his surrounding area would be strong enough to affect the weather of the immediate surrounding area. He hadn't even finished using it all up yet. At this point, he had defeated around 12 villain bots. But the whole experience was so disorienting that he couldn't keep track of how many points each had been worth. The clouds above them boomed with thunder ominously, though thankfully it hadn't started raining. One more and it'll be unlucky 13. This one will probably have a strong effect. So of course it was at this point that a hulking giant robot appeared from within the city. The zero-pointer Present Mike had dismissed as a gimmick. All the examinees in the area fled at the sight of it, and Izuku had turned around to do just the same thing, until he heard a voice call out between the rumbles of thunder. Oh, Izuku glanced over to see the same girl that had helped him was caught under some rubble. She was right in the path of the robot's massive tread, closer to the robot than to Izuku. Immediately Izuku switched mental gears. Running was no longer an option. She's too far, he won't make it to her in time. The robot's tread looks very stable, and it's too big to trip safely. It might just hit both the girl and other people running away. Could he force an internal error like those other robots? This isn't a simple light bulb. He has no idea what kinds of fail-safes UA would have put in place to keep them running. Can he still cause it to malfunction if he's that vague about what the effect is supposed to be? What can he do? What can he do? What the hell do you think you're playing at, Deku? You're cursed. You can't possibly be a hero or make it into UA. Forget crappy quirks. Your quirk is a hindrance, even less than useless. He's just a curse anyway. So how could it even be possible for him to save a person? Above him, Izuku caught sight of a flash of lightning within the clouds, followed by loud thunder. The sight of the bad omen derailed his self-deprecation. The probability of being struck by lightning is higher for tall, metal objects that can act as a rod, and it is very unfortunate. Izuku took a deep breath that reached for what was now about a week's worth energy inside him, held out his right hand, and snapped the whole well away, cursing the zero-pointer. His only thought was lightning. As though it was an act of the gods, a lightning bolt came down from the dark heavens to electrify the giant villain bot. It lit up like a tree on Christmas. But Izuku knew this wasn't due to any gods or fate, it was just bad luck. Izuku and probably everyone else was forced to look away from its painful brightness. However, the moment was over as fast as lightning usually is. Thunder roared through the area less than a second later as everyone stopped to stare at the now charred robot. Izuku waited with bated breath to see if it would continue moving. It didn't. What the hell was that? Present Mike exclaimed into the speakers, maybe accidentally, before a buzzer sounded. Oh, time's up kiddos. Test's over. Ignore the bizarre weather and proceed off the field. Unless you're hurt enough that you need to stay put. Our very own recovery girl will be out to treat you momentarily. Izuku ran over to the girl, who was still staring at the robot behind her in shock. Are you okay? Why, you didn't feel any of the lightning, right? After pushing the rock off her leg, Izuku helped pull the girl up. She stared at him with wide eyes and a gaping mouth. Thanks, but was that because of you? Why, yeah. You were too far away and I wanted to make sure you were safe, so. Oh my god, that's the coolest quirk I've ever seen. Her face split into an excited smile, and she shook Izuku's hand vigorously. What quirk do you have? Weather manipulation? Oh no. Facing turning a bit pale, the girl just barely turned to the side in time to puke on the ground and not Izuku's shoes. He thought that was the best proof he could get that he had really used up all of his bad luck with that one shot. He ended up being ushered out of the city before he could continue talking to the girl, who stayed behind to get her leg healed by Recovery Girl. Right outside UAS entrance at their designated meeting place, he met back up with Hitoshi. His friend examined him with raised eyebrows. Okay, maybe I'm jumping to conclusions because bad weather is a bad omen, but was that weather and random lightning on the other field you? Even the people in the other testing areas could see it. Why yeah, the weather just built up on its own, probably because I was letting out too much bad luck in the same region. And for the lightning my target was a giant robot, so it worked out better than expected. Hitoshi stared at him in stunned silence for a moment, before he gave a growing, smiling chuckle. Your quirk really is something else, Izuku. And in a good way. Don't worry about what those assholes like Katsuki think. Hitoshi slung an arm around Izuku's shoulder, and looked down at him with a widening smile. Way to outflash the flashy hero quirk examinees. Good job. UA would have to be absolute morons to not want to make a hero out of you now. I'll bet you're a shoo-in for the heroics department. We should celebrate. Izuku blinked in surprise, before a smile bloomed on his own face. It's bad luck to celebrate early. And the robot I hit with the lightning wasn't even worth any points. Hitoshi rolled his eyes, but his tone was still lighthearted. Yeah. We'll wait till your letter comes then. As Izuku and Hitoshi walked back to their house, Izuku realized he was feeling lighter than he's felt in a long time. Did the Jinx kid really just summon a frickin' lightning bolt? That's sorta extreme for just bad luck, ain't it? Snipe questioned incredulously to the other teachers. They made various noises of vague agreement, but Toshinori just watched the freckled boy shown on the monitors in contemplation. He remembered him, of course, the poor child that had been caught up with a villain when he needed to get to the hospital to see his mother. Toshinori hadn't been sure that he'd make it in time before his quirk failed him. He was lucky that it hadn't. Toshinori had been busy this year. With his body becoming a ticking timer, he had to find a successor. After some careful thought, he decided to meet the suggestion that his ex-sidekick had sent his way by in Nezu, Tagada Mirio. The boy had exactly the kind of positive, strong-willed spirit that Toshinori was looking for, and he was also very skilled due to Night Eye's training. So a little before this very exam, Toshinori had offered one for all to him. Tagada had accepted it with a beaming smile. This also came with the side benefit that he and Night Eye were now on speaking terms once again. Toshinori teaching at UA now was part of this plan. He wanted to be close at hand while his successor learned throughout his final year to help him integrate one for all with his original quirk. And since he could no longer work more than 3 hours a day with his full All Might form, regular hero work wasn't as practical an option compared to teaching the next generation. But even with all this going on, he had wondered on occasion how that boy had been able to handle the villain before he arrived, as well as how his mother was faring. When Toshinori arrived at his first viewing of the UA Heroics practical entrance exam, he hadn't been expecting that he would get an answer to one of those questions. Seeing the blackened, immobile zero-pointer left no doubt that the young man's quirk dealt with the slime villain, though the method it used to do this was up in the air. Toshinori had been watching him throughout the exam as well and noted that it had the capability to deal with the robots in a variety of ways. Midoriya Izuku. Quirk, Jinx. It produces energy that increases the probability of unfortunate events occurring. The principal reviewed young Midoriya's profile summary, his intrigued glee vibrating through his voice. What potential a quirk like this has. Probability manipulation. The possibilities that comes with something like that. But it all depends on what defines an event as unfortunate. What is this energy? How is it made? What is the range of events that it can affect? Reading his full quirk description is a must. You've really taken an interest in this, Midoriya, principal. It's rare for you to get this stirred up over someone's entrance exam performance. Midnight canted her tone slightly when she reached her innuendo, making Toshinori wince, but her interest in Nezu's answer was genuine. Toshinori also wanted to hear it. Principal Nezu nodded his head towards Midnight. My apologies, but quirks like his are some of the most captivating to learn about. They take concepts that we only have an ideological understanding of, such as luck, and bring it into the realm of physical definition. Not only that, but he makes for a promising student and hero. Logically he does, yes, but a quirk like his will be looked at poorly by the general public. Like how black cats are sometimes killed by people that think they're unlucky. Eraserhead spoke up for the first time since the viewing had started. His voice was a gruff but composed thing, matching how he had been sitting in his seat with horrible posture. However, his eyes had never once lost focus on what was going on during the exam. Then that will be a hurdle we have to prepare him for. It's not like villainous heroes can't be successful. They even made a ranking for heroes that look more like villains. Ectoplasm is on that list, and he's a wonderful example of a hero. The principal nodded his head towards Ectoplasm in recognition, who nodded back. He then steepled his paws as a slightly mischievous chuckle rose out of his small body. And Midoriya Izuku's already passed his first hurdle, hasn't he? I'm certain you'll watch over him carefully. Eraserhead. Toshinori caught the implication that the boy would be assigned to Eraserhead's class, as he was sure Eraserhead himself did. The man stared at Principal Nezu with dark eyes narrowed in suspicion. From Toshinori's understanding, students were usually assigned to either Class A or Class B at random. Higher-scoring students tended to lean towards Class A assignment, but UA does mix it up so that the top 20 examinees aren't all in Class A. Singling out a student to be given to a particular class was unusual. Was the principal just taking into account how guidance for Midoriya's quirk would be better suited for someone with Eraserhead's background? Or was there something else he was seeing from this setup that Toshinori was missing? But either way, it seems like young Midoriya has the kind of caring mindset that All Might looks for in heroes. He looks forward to meeting the boy again. With the end of the exam came a carefree time for Izuku. He rode the slight high that came with knowing that his quirk was capable of saving people. After the exam, Izuku walked through the city with Hitoshi on an outing, both of them having figured out that this was an acceptable hanging out activity. And in the middle of explaining his unusual idea of getting ear piercings, in order to wear cross-shaped earrings that would help either mitigate or enhance his luck depending on their orientation, they started browsing through a knick-knack shop. Izuku absolutely loved those shops that sold random but charming decorations, as there was almost always something there that doubled as a good or bad luck charm. It was there that Izuku found the perfect talisman to gift Hitoshi. As soon they got home, Izuku presented bag holding the item that he had clandestinely purchased and hid in his backpack. Here you go, Hitoshi-kun. I got this for you as a congratulations for your hard work. Hitoshi blinked at it before accepting the bag. You really didn't have to. As he took out the item, Hitoshi trailed off. He looked at the cute cartoony beckoning cat figure in his palm. It was just the right size to be held in a single hand. You can put that on your side of the room to ward off the bad luck, and it'll still match your cat theme, Izuku explained needlessly. Hitoshi stared at it for a long while, to the point that Izuku got worried. Do you not like it? I can get you something that's not luck-related if you want. The other quickly shook his head. No, it's just... Placing the cat down, Hitoshi pulled an identical-looking bag out of his backpack, and Izuku immediately saw where this was going. Hitoshi awkwardly presented the bag to Izuku, who took it from him gently. I was going to wait until after you got your letter to give this to you, but now feels like a better time. Izuku peeked into the bag. It was the same exact beckoning cat he had gotten Hitoshi. He burst out in laughter at the sight. Haha, looks like we've found the perfect combination of both our interests. Looks like it, yeah, Hitoshi chuckled back. A residual smile was still on Izuku's face as they both placed their cats on their bedside tables, with one side of the room being that of a subtle cat enthusiast, and the other just looking like a mishmash derived from a paranoid, superstitious person. Anyone else would think that the two looked horrible side by side, but Izuku thought it had character. The short reprieve ended the next day though, since unfortunately life was made up by more than just Hitoshi and cat figurines. Deku, Izuku froze in place, his already plastered smile straining a bit, but turned around to face Katsuki. For all the trouble he went through to act polite, Katsuki just grabbed him by the collar of his school uniform anyway. Kaken, who the fuck was that dead-eyed asshole that was with you and what did he do to me? That was Shinsou Hitoshi. We met a while ago. He just used his quirk to make you go away. You telling me he mind controls people? Katsuki gained a pensive scowl, before pushing Izuku back out of his hold and scoffing. Stumbling back, Izuku predictably fell right on his bottom. Well, I guess it doesn't matter. If he can't pass the practical then he's not a threat. As he was slowly picking himself up, Izuku had to suppress his own scowl from replacing his smile. Even if he can't pass the practical, he could still get into heroics later. The sports festival, especially as a way students from other departments can get noticed and transferred. And if that happens, he'll be another extra competing against me just like everyone else. I'll show him his trick won't work on me a second time. Then, Katsuki gained a suspicious look on his face, as though he had just thought of something. How do you know that guy anyway? Izuku paused, thinking over his answer carefully. Up until now he had been content to let Katsuki stay ignorant about what happened. It was an emotional mess he would rather not deal with, so the less of his peers that knew the better. But now that there was a good opportunity to tell him, Izuku felt somewhat obligated. Kaken had liked his mother when they had still been friends. He actually knew her, so Izuku should tell him, right? But would he even care? He took too long to answer. Katsuki ended up losing his patience, crossing his arms while growling, fine. If you're going to take this long to answer a simple question, then don't tell me. I don't even give a shit. Sorry, Kaken. There's something more important that I wanted to ask you about anyway. Do you think you passed? Katsuki narrowed his eyes at Izuku. His muscles tensed up again. You mean the practical? Yes, I mean the practical. What else would I fucking mean? A nerd like you will pass the test portion easily. You're actually considering the chance that I passed. All you really had to do for the exam was break shit. And your quirk is strong when it comes to that at least. Katsuki answered with ease, as though this whole time he hadn't been telling Izuku his quirk was less than useless. However, Izuku supposed it made sense. He also had that mentality of knowing that while his quirk could be strong, it was still a curse, like a great curse Omikuji. He'd be bad luck for villains, but he's also bad luck for himself. Izuku glanced down at his fidgeting hands. Well, how I did compared to the other testers is anyone's guess, but I don't think I did poorly. He wasn't looking at Katsuki, but Izuku could feel the glare on him simmering with anger. He heard Katsuki turn his back abruptly to storm away as he called out, "Don't think this puts you on equal ground with me. I'll make sure to show you that I'm the best. Always, your quirk won't beat me." Izuku watched his old friend's back disappear as he walked on to leave Izuku behind, just as always. He just stood there for a moment, thinking over what he said. This was the first time Katsuki's ever given any indication that he felt threatened by Izuku's quirk. So much of his behavior makes more sense in hindsight if that's always been the case. But even knowing this, there's nothing that Izuku can do to change anything. There are times when he's had a particularly nasty fall, the kind that made him wonder if he needed to go to the hospital, that he's felt Jinx is a threat to himself. Katsuki has also experienced that, so it was no wonder he'd feel the same. And with what happened to Mom, maybe they were both right to think that way. Later that same week, their UA letters finally arrived. Izuku and Hitoshi both sequestered themselves in their room to look at them together, sitting on Izuku's bed. He had put on some torn pants and a striking black t-shirt that had the Eye of Horus inked out in white on the front. Dressing in the dark colors helped mentally prep himself for being honest about his feelings for whatever came out of his envelope. But in this case it also had an additional benefit. The Eye of Horus was a protective symbol, so it was considered lucky by his quirk, and Izuku had wanted some luck in this moment. The two of them examined the outside of their letters for a second, and immediately noticed a difference. Your envelope has something else in it. Look at how it's bulkier than mine. Without any fanfare, Hitoshi tore open his own envelope to pull out a piece of paper. His eyes only glanced over it for half a minute before he stated, "Got into general education." For a second Izuku was confused about whether he should console Hitoshi for not getting into the hero course, before coming to the conclusion that this was still matching Hitoshi's expectation, and just getting into UA on its own was something to celebrate. Anyway, good job Hitoshi-kun. The corner of Hitoshi's mouth curved up in a slight smile, and he waved towards Izuku's envelope. "Thanks, but don't keep us in suspense. Let's see what your mystery prize is." He took a minute to take a breath, then reached for the top of his letter. He opened it with hands trembling from nerves, causing whatever was inside to fall out and drop onto the floor. Izuku was only just able to see it was some sort of metal device before it turned on. Izuku's heart skipped a beat when a projection of All Might himself lit up in front of them. He wore a pinstriped yellow suit instead of his iconic hero costume, but his strong face and broad body was unmistakable. The hero's grin was wide and intense. With his head held high and a thumbs up, he declared, "I am here to tell you your results." Oh my god. Izuku found himself clutching Hitoshi's shirt with both hands to pull him close in excitement, his eyes never straying from his hero brought to life. He shook his friend back and forth. "Oh my god, Hitoshi-kun, it's All Might. I mean, I met him before that one time, but I was preoccupied and it was a rough day, so." "You've met All Might before. Young Midoriya, you passed the written exam with flying colors. Good job. And throughout the course of the practical exam you earned yourself 28 villain points. Unfortunately, this amount on its own isn't high enough to earn you a spot in our heroics course." Izuku was overcome with a brief sensation of crushing disappointment, thinking that he had not only failed to be accepted into UA's heroics department like he had used to dream of before despite never believing he could do it, he had also failed Hitoshi. And that was even worse, but it was interrupted when All Might pointed a finger at them to continue. However, villain points aren't the only thing UA takes into account when scoring. The screen that had stayed unnoticed behind All Might's looming figure turned on. Izuku first recognized the scene it played as being of the fake city testing area, indicating this was probably footage of the exam. He was proven right when his own image appeared on the screen. The Izuku he was watching snapped, only for the robot to recover and still be mobile. What he hadn't seen previously that the camera focused on, though, was the brown-haired girl's face of surprise at the sight of the robot about to attack Izuku, and subsequently, her coming from behind to touch it with her hand, sending it floating into the air. She brought the fingertips of her two hands together to send it crashing to the pavement. All Might started up again as the scene of the girl asking Izuku if he was alright played out. Along with taking note of how many villain bots you destroyed, UA also looked at how many of your fellow examinees you helped or saved. In a cutthroat test like this, taking the time to assist one of your competitors without knowing that there's benefit in doing so acts as a test of character. UA doesn't just want good fighters, they want good heroes. Hiraraka Ochako here protected you from the villain bot. Though it may have been to her mutual benefit of getting the three-pointer, the judges still granted her 10 rescue points for it. And as for you, All Might pointed at the screen as the scene changed. It now showed the two bright lightnings striking down on the zero-pointer. The camera then switched to focus on the girl, Uraraka, who after squinting her eyes away from the light, turned back to look up at the burned-out towering robot and all. With your successful rescue against such a large threat, without the benefit of points and for the sake of one kind competitor, you received 60 rescue points. This brings your total up to 88 points, the highest score of the exam. Congratulations, young Midoriya. You're not only admitted into the heroics department, you are also now the student representative of your year. All Might's smile gleamed as he stuck out a thumbs up towards him. That's what I call plus ultra. What? Holy crap. Hitoshi reacted before Izuku could fully process what was said. He started gently patting Izuku on the cheek, but Izuku just continued to stare blankly into space. Earth to Izuku, you still with me? How many fingers am I holding up? This can't be right. Hitoshi snapped his fingers in Izuku's face until he was forced to turn and look at his friend. Now that he had his attention, Hitoshi raised his eyebrows at him. I'm pretty damn sure that UA wouldn't be wrong about your test score. Izuku protested. But I'm not. I can't. I'm not first place material. How is it even possible for me to be the number one examinee? In this case, I'd say you are first place material, since it's like All Might said, UA is looking for good heroes. And you'd be a good hero, because you look out for people. Hitoshi stuck his thumb at the now powered off projector. What kind of hero school wouldn't value a student that saved someone? But even if that's the case, who ever heard of a hero that's bad luck? Who fucking cares? Hitoshi finally yelled out. He glared down at Izuku in frustration. You didn't need luck to get admitted. Izuku scowled down at his lap, before looking back up to set the look upon his friend. But luck is important for being a hero. There's more behind that than just superstition or prejudice. It doesn't matter how good a hero is. All it takes is one unlucky moment and they could be killed or get seriously injured, or even worse, get other people killed instead. Even if my quirk could be used for heroics, it's not logical to invest in someone with increased risk. All of the fight seemed to leak out of Hitoshi in a sigh. His eyebrows screwed together as though Izuku's words had glued them into a lasting expression of discontentment. After leaning back to plop onto Izuku's covers and stare at the ceiling, Hitoshi muttered, even if that's what some people think, you're hardly the only person in the world that has unlucky days. And people thinking that your presence will curse them is illogical in itself. It's not like you don't know how to properly direct it or withhold it. They're just scared of what they aren't comfortable with, and they've gotten you to think the same way about yourself. Izuku felt his breath catch in his throat when Hitoshi glanced up at him, and he was caught in a purple gaze that was both exhausted and unyielding. You deserve this. You getting into UA was all a product of your own effort, strategy, talent, and character. That's way better than just being lucky or having a good quirk. Hitoshi, Izuku didn't even know what to say to that. He couldn't even name the feeling that was building inside. He could only recognize the crushing pressure in his chest that came from it. He ended up asking questions without processing that he wanted answers. Why? Why are trying so hard with me? Why do you care so much? Hitoshi stared at him for a long moment before admitting, I don't know. I think it's just. I hate that what everyone has told you has made you hate yourself, because I feel like that about myself sometimes too. It pisses me off. What? But your quirk isn't bad. Villains have given it a bad image, but you know you aren't like those people. I know, but it's easy to forget when everyone else tells you otherwise. Just like how it is with you. Izuku had to look away from the intense gaze, and stared down at his carefully still but clenched fists. The tension in his muscles told him that if his automatic response to stress hadn't been to repress it, his hands would probably be trembling. And the sting in his eyes told him that they wanted to leak tears, but he wouldn't let them. He used to be such a crybaby as a child, but over the years he had repressed that response as well. It's not that he's gotten strong enough to not feel the need to cry at what many would consider trivial problems or emotions, but that he's now skilled enough to not respond physically to that need. While that day on the rooftop with Hitoshi had been the breaking of a dam built up over the course of those years, crying still didn't come easy. Izuku was stuck in that familiar limbo of knowing that he was at the point of tears without being able to experience the cathartic release of them. He'd read somewhere before, a random article on the internet, that crying was a natural function of the body that needed to occur to help it settle itself, and from his experience he could fully believe that. It was no wonder that his mental state had gotten so out of turn that he tried to kill himself. Why is it that people say you shouldn't cry? That you should aim to be strong enough that you won't cry? Don't they realize that that will only make things worse? What's the point of seeming strong on the outside, when on the inside you're a wreck? You deserve to get in too, Hitoshi, Izuku found himself saying. You've already saved a person for real, and you look out for people, and yet you weren't accepted with me. That's not right. They had no way of knowing what I've done or who I am outside of my application and what I showed them at the practical, so they made the right call technically. And I'm not like this with most people. Izuku, I'm actually standoffish usually. I just can't ignore you when I personally know some of the pain you're feeling. It's a bias. That doesn't matter, you still saved someone. You saved me. I'm sorry you didn't get in. Before uttering those words, Izuku hadn't thought about the situation that way. Hitoshi had stopped him from killing himself, but that was something he wanted, maybe even wants, to do. The thing that he thought he gained from the experience was Hitoshi's attention. Hitoshi's care, Hitoshi saying he would miss him if he was gone. Not that Hitoshi saved his life, but when Izuku removed his own feelings from the situation, when he ignored the pain that he didn't get to end and thought about it impersonally, like it happened to someone else, he can say without a doubt that Hitoshi saved that person he stopped from jumping off a roof. That Hitoshi saved him. You saved me. That means something, Izuku repeated listlessly. His eyes unconsciously wandered down and to the side back to Hitoshi, who was still staring at him. Slowly, Hitoshi's eyes fluttered shut, and he sighed, I know. Of course it means something. You're still here, after all. That alone makes it mean something. I don't need anything else to come out of it. Izuku didn't smile at that. But if the sense of fulfillment and elation that he felt from Hitoshi saying that his life was inherently valuable hadn't been so melancholy, he might have. I got into UAS Gen Ed. Wow, that's amazing, Shinsou-kun. Congratulations. Haruka Nori trilled. She patted Hitoshi's shoulder with a smile. Haruka Naru nodded in agreement, a slight smile on his own face. That's a tough school to get into, The heroics kids get all the attention, but their normal education is nothing to scoff at. You're on a great path. They didn't think to console Hitoshi about not getting into heroics instead, because they didn't know that's what he was aiming for. Neither Izuku nor Hitoshi had told them they were taking the practical exam. Both because it would be less embarrassing if they didn't get in, and because they wouldn't have to skirt around the Haruka's lack of belief they would be accepted. That also meant the Harukas weren't prepared when Haruka Nori asked, "What about you, Midoriya-kun?" Izuku glanced away, before looking back and holding out the piece of paper that came along with the mailed projector, his official acceptance letter. Hitoshi noticed that he never let the smile on his face drop, though Hitoshi could tell it was stiff. "I got into the heroics department." Haruka Nori opened her mouth to give her congratulations, then paused in the middle of the motion when she processed what Izuku said. Haruka Nori looked away from the mug of water he had been in the middle of bringing up to his mouth to stare at Izuku incomprehensibly. His wife recovered before he did. She glanced over the letter in confirmation, and almost jumped to exclaim, really? That's amazing, Midoriya-kun." Izuku rubbed the back of his head, and Hitoshi thought he was trying to make his grin look sheepish. "Why yeah, I couldn't believe it, especially when they said I would be this year's class representative too." The mug in Haruka Nori's hand fell from his hand to clatter onto the table and spill water over a good half of the surface, as well as his lap. Hitoshi had to fight hard to keep a smirk off his face when he saw the man just stupidly staring at Izuku with his hand still in the same position as it had been with the mug. His wife didn't even glance in his direction. It was an understandable reaction to have, honestly. UA on its own was hard to get into, and UA's heroics department was even harder. Most people in Japan would put it on par with winning the lottery. So to not only get in but be the #1 of the year, that was beyond winning the lottery. Not to mention unheard of for someone with Izuku's kind of quirk. They were called villain quirks for a reason. The reaction was understandable, but Hitoshi still got a gleeful, almost sadistic sense of spiteful pride out of it, and it wasn't even him that accomplished it. This time, someone else beat Haruka Nori to the chase. "What? For real?" Both Hitoshi and Izuku glanced over to the living room to see Fuyuki staring at them over the couch with wide eyes. "That's seriously awesome, Midoriya. Like, once you're in the sports festival you're gonna be famous, and you're gonna be a hero too." Aki was sitting next to him, the top half of her head just peeking out over the back of the couch. She didn't say anything, but her eyes were sparkling with awe. Unfortunately, Natsume didn't show as good of a reaction as those two. She yelled in confusion over at her spot by the hallway entrance where she had been passing through. But why would they even accept someone like dinner? We should have a celebration dinner for both Shinsou and Midoriya. What would you boys like? Haruka Nori suddenly shouted. She clapped her hands together and smiled at Izuku. "Izuku can pick," Hitoshi instantly replied. "But, Hitoshi-kun, it's fine. I don't care what we have, so you get to pick." Izuku glanced down at the ground in thought, before looking back at Haruka Nori. His smile was more strained as he stated, "Katsuden is my favorite." "Katsuden it is, then," she declared. Only then did she glance at her husband, and winced at the sight of the mess he'd made and his continued lack of reaction. "While I get on that, why don't you start cleaning up, dear?" Haruka Nori startled back to life at his wife's cue. He opened his mouth, closed it, and opened it again to say, "Congratulations," then immediately shot out of his seat to go to the kitchen. They all stared at him as he fled. The remaining Haruka whispered, "Sorry about him. That was just very unexpected. He just needs some time to process it. Didn't think someone with a bad quirk could do something like that, huh?" Hitoshi snarked bitterly, and Haruka winced a second time, but didn't respond. Maybe it would have been the more socially acceptable option to just let it go. But when he was feeling spiteful, God was he spiteful. Apparently Haruka Nori didn't know what to say to that, so she just moved on from the topic. "Well, is there anything you'll be needing for your hero classes, Midoriya-kun? I'm not sure what sort of supplies they might ask of us along with the usual school things. I don't think we'll need anything like that." The letter said only the usual list of materials that they have for all departments was needed. Izuku paused for a moment, then glanced to the side as he continued with, "This will probably seem like a concerning request, but I had this idea for my hero costume that I submitted to them along with my application, where I describe how earrings can be a useful and unique addition to my costume. But I don't even have any piercings, so I was wondering." Haruka thought to herself for a few seconds, before giving Izuku a worried smile. "Usually I would say something like that isn't appropriate for a boy your age, and especially to wear to school. People will think you're a delinquent. But if UA is okay with it and you need it for your costume, then I don't see why not." Izuku's face brightened up a bit at her answer. To Hitoshi, his smile still didn't seem genuine, but at least his now excited green eyes suited it more. Hitoshi hadn't taken Izuku to be the kind of guy that would get his ears pierced. Even with his villain quirk and superstitions, he still maintained this air of being a studious goody two-shoes that made him deceptively average when he really wasn't. It made the idea a bit of a surprise when he had first mentioned it. It made Hitoshi think of the dark shirt and pants that Izuku had worn back in their room, which for some reason he had to change out of to something more average before coming out here with a pasted smile. Hitoshi was spot on when he had described it as Izuku compartmentalizing, and overlay that with the image of Izuku wearing earrings, just a little more edgy jewelry and accessories, which he could probably just find in that box of his, maybe add some black hair dye and he'd turn into a punk, or maybe a goth. Hitoshi didn't know anything about those trends. Izuku had mentioned that designed his hero costume with the mind of embracing superstition, but not much else besides the cross-shaped earrings thing. It made Hitoshi suspicious as to what kind of aesthetic he was going to use. He just had to convince Izuku to take a picture of himself with it on. Who knows when he'll get the chance to see him wear it in person. Well, it wouldn't be a bad look for him. Actually, he'd be hot with earrings. Wait, what? Izuku and Hitoshi both took the same train commute to UA together for their first day of high school. And all the while Izuku couldn't help but fiddle with his new silver cross earrings. They weren't too big, just being long enough that the end of the cross went past his earlobe. But it drew his eyes, and whenever he looked into the mirror now, he noticed that Hitoshi also tended to stare at them occasionally before he would avert his eyes upon being caught. He had said they looked good on Izuku, so he was hoping that was true. The additional luck they gave Izuku was nice, too. They were small, so they didn't give off a lot of good luck. But it was doubled up since there were 2 of them. While it certainly wasn't enough to fully cut off the amount of energy Jinx produced, it was enough that he could feel the energy beneath his skin being soothed to stay lethargic, helping his anxiety. He was storing up the misfortune currently. He had been for the past few days in preparation to use his quirk during classes, and the holy symbols helped to reduce energy production at least a little so that it didn't accumulate quite so fast. Nothing particularly unfortunate had happened to him today as a result. He was hoping it would stay that way, but didn't really believe that it would. Eventually, the 2 of them reached UA and had to part ways in the hallway. Izuku stopped by the room with the sign for 1A, and nodded to Hitoshi as he continued down the hall for 1 degree Celsius. Izuku stared at the enlarged door, took a deep breath, and only then fixed his most photogenic smile upon his face. He hadn't wanted to ruin Hitoshi's mood on the way to his first day at UA, so he had held off on wearing one all the way until now. He felt rewarded for doing so. He didn't have to strain himself too hard to keep it up, so it'll probably last him the whole day just like he wants. Honestly, he should be feeling happy enough to actually smile today. He had made it. He was at UA in the hero department, but it still didn't feel quite real. The absence of his mother was notable. He knew she would have been so proud to see him here, and yet she'd never get to. And in the back of his mind was the constant reminder that this might only be temporary, something to enjoy the experience of while it lasted before giving his place to Hitoshi. He wasn't actually trying to become a hero. He didn't believe that he could. Not only that, but it was confirmed that Katsuki had been accepted when their teacher had called them to the teacher's lounge to congratulate them both, and there were only 2 hero classes for every year level at UA. Which means there was a 50/50 chance of Katsuki being in his class. And when it comes to chances that are like coin tosses, Izuku slid open the door to classroom 1A. He very carefully did not drop his smile when the first thing he saw and heard was Katsuki arguing with a boy wearing glasses. Izuku loses every single time. Most of the class was already present, but he could hardly even notice the rest when Katsuki stole away all of his attention. As he walked into the room, Katsuki glanced at him, only to scowl and turn away. He had acted like that towards Izuku when he first heard that Izuku had gotten accepted too. Likely, he had already said everything he wanted to on the matter when he had asked Izuku if he thought he gotten and therefore considered his challenge to be in place. Although he really wasn't even trying to be a challenge for Katsuki in the first place. "Oh, it's you, the plain-looking boy. I'm so glad you got in." Izuku had only just glanced over the rest of his classmates when a familiar voice sounded. Looking over his shoulder, he saw Uraraka Ochako approach him from the hallway with a smile more real than the one Izuku was wearing and a wave. When he was looking for it, Izuku could now spot the little circles on the pads of her fingers that must be connected to her quirk. His smile became a little lighter. "Good to see you again. You there. What do you think you're doing with those blatant dress code violations on your ears?" Izuku's attention was forcibly moved back to the glasses-wearing boy, who strode up to him as though he had been sent on a mission given to him by God himself. His smile became strained when the boy towered over him to point at one of Izuku's earrings in offense. UA is a highly prestigious academy with no time to deal with the likes of delinquents or rapscallions within its student body. Wearing earrings is a clear sign of rebellion against higher authority in an effort to maintain individualism and control over yourself. And while I won't comment on any discontent that you may feel for those in charge of us, I must insist that the teachers and rules of UA are to your benefit and should be respected. Please refrain from wearing these while on campus. Gee, there's nothing in the dress code saying students can't wear earrings. Also, please don't interrupt people when they're talking. Pardon, the dress code doesn't mention earrings at all. Having already foreseen, someone would assume that. Izuku brought out his copy of the student handbook from his bag and flipped it to the section on UAS dress code. He handed it to the boy, who read over it carefully. Ah, I see. You are correct. There's nothing to say that earrings violate school policy. My apologies. The boy closed the book firmly to hand it back to Izuku. But even as he was saying this, he looked at Izuku with doubt. But even so, earrings are often considered inappropriate in a formal work environment. So I would suggest reconsidering using them as a fashion statement by the time you start your career as a hero. People may see you as being less capable to perform your duties because it. Doesn't Hawks wear earrings? You can't really see them when he's wearing his full hero costume, but everyone knows that they're there. The self-assigned hall monitor didn't know how to respond to that. What was he going to say? That people saw the number 3 hero of the nation as being less reliable because he wore earrings, while he obviously had a more proper upbringing that made him strict with both spoken and unspoken rules. Izuku suspected that even he could see that that was a stupid thing to believe. When the boy's face began to flush red, Izuku assumed it was from embarrassment now instead of anger. Why don't we just start over? Uraraka offered an olive branch, looking at the other boy with a sympathetic smile. My name's Uraraka Achako, what's yours? Ida Tenya. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. The now-named Ida gave a deep bow to Izuku. I ask that you please forgive me for my rudeness. I had actually seen you at the exam, and saw that you divined the true nature of UAS test. I should have realized from the start that this ability to look past the written regulations and see things as they truly are applied to real life itself. I will work hard to become more flexible in my thinking so that I may do the same. What is this guy even talking about? It was a testament to Izuku's practice that he was able to keep a grin through all of this. It's nice to meet you too. If you're here to socialize, then get out. The three of them stared at each other, before following the direction the gruff voice had come from down towards the ground behind Uraraka. Lying on the floor of the hallway in a bright yellow sleeping bag was an unkempt, black-haired man. As he picked himself up and stepped out of the bag to reveal plain black clothing, Izuku mind pinged in realization. After seeing the man's merch upon the various shelves and wall space of Hitoshi's side of the room, Izuku instantly recognized him, even if he wasn't wearing his yellow shaders. Izuku accidentally let his expression morph into one of surprise and his shock. You're a racerhead. My friend is the biggest fan of you. Oh, don't tell him I said that, please. I know this is weird to ask, but can I get your autograph for him? Eraserhead gave Izuku a long, unamused, uncomfortable stare that made him fidget in place, before putting him out of his misery. No. He then set his gaze away from Izuku and onto the rest of the class. I'm your homeroom teacher, Aizawa shouted. Everyone put on your gym clothes and head out. We're skipping orientation to test your quirks. He just knew that his good luck wouldn't keep. After changing his clothes in the locker room, Izuku found himself being pulled to the side by his new teacher. Immediately, he began muttering his excuses. I'm so sorry about the autograph thing, Aizawa-sensei. I know that it must have been incredibly annoying. I don't care about that. Eraserhead shut him down before he could gain any more verbal momentum. Izuku couldn't tell what the hero was thinking behind his deadpan stare, and it made him nervous. However, he didn't let it show on his face. These tests that you're about to perform are all physical fitness tests like the ones you would do in previous schooling, except you're allowed to use your quirk to boost your results by any means necessary outside of sabotaging other students. I typically use the top-performing tester of the practical exam to demonstrate this concept. But in this case, you don't have the typical kind of quirk that top scorers usually have. Do you have a way to use your quirk that would enhance any of your scores? Or should I use another one of your classmates for the demonstration? Izuku felt his smile become painful to hold. Literally the first day of school and his quirks already causing problems. But Aizawa let him have a good few minutes to think his answer through. When he looked back at him, Izuku had found a possible solution to him failing all his tests, but not a solution to him giving a demonstration. I'm sorry, but I don't see any way that my quirk would let me physically perform better in exercises, so it would be best to use someone else. But, excuse me for asking, but what is the method that we're scored by for the tests? For example, for a sprint would you be using a timer or something? Aizawa gained a certain glint in his eyes. Izuku wasn't sure if that was a good or bad sign. UA has electronical devices that can measure distances, record the time at which students cross the finish line, and etc. Things like that will be used for most of the tests. And if there was, say, An obvious difference in how I actually perform on the test versus what my score is recorded as by the device that was caused by my quirk. Izuku averted his eyes to look down at his feet in embarrassment. He couldn't keep his tone from becoming self-conscious. Would you still accept that as my official score? It was a shameful thing to ask. He was essentially saying that he wanted permission to cheat. But Eraserhead had framed what they were supposed to do in a very particular way. Get a good score by any means necessary. Izuku knew that the man himself didn't have a quirk that would improve his own physical attributes. It was impossible for him to be the type of hero who only values physical quirks without being a hypocrite. When Izuku put these two together, it didn't seem like such a large leap of logic that he would accept a method for boosting results that didn't involve physically improving them. And Jinx as a quirk wasn't the kind that really aligned with the concept of fair play. Izuku's theoretical method for doing better than others would essentially always be to sabotage them with bad luck. That's probably why his teacher had clarified that that would be the only thing not allowed in the first place. If he wasn't allowed to cheat at these exercises, then he didn't see himself lasting very long in the heroics course. Izuku was nervous for a moment, but when a slightly frightening grin stretched across Eraserhead's previously stoic face, he felt his heart settle. I like that kind of thinking. It shows potential. Whatever the score records your results as will be your official score, as long as it's a product of your quirk. And we have extras, so it's okay if you break them, but try not to. Eraserhead waved him back towards where the rest of his classmates were gathering with a final word of, "Don't worry about the demonstration thing, it's not an inconvenience to me." Actually, having to work around the top examinee having a non-classical hero quirk is a refreshing problem to have in my opinion. There are already too many muscle heads in this industry. Was Aizawa-sensei able to tell that he was worried about that? He thought for sure he hadn't let that show on his face. As Izuku rejoined the group to stand next to a welcoming Uraraka, he indiscreetly turned his earrings so that the crosses were inverted, long end pointing up towards his eardrum instead of down away from it. With each one he turned, he felt a small jolt in the energy under his skin. He had already been saving up for a couple of days now, but he might as well try out his new accessories since he had. Would this count as cheating? But they're only earrings, and that one boy has a whole support belt it looks like. Well, if Aizawa-sensei has a problem with them, he can just take them off later. In the end, Eraserhead had Katsuki do a softball throw as a demonstration. Everyone was awed by the explosive power Katsuki used to throw the ball a full 705.2 meters. But Izuku was paying more attention to the little handheld device that showed them the number in lit-up digits. It must have some sort of sensor to be able to track the ball, and it must have the capacity to display large numbers. Izuku didn't know how high it went, but he was hoping that since it had a more modern look, it didn't have a limited range. At the very least, the range it already showed was promising for Izuku's method. Jinx was good at breaking things, electronics especially, but in this case Izuku just needed it to have glitch. Logically, it followed that there was a certain process the device had to accomplish to display an accurate reading. First, the sensor would have to detect either where the ball had landed or its velocity as to calculate it. Then it would have to show a series of numbers. Technically speaking, the device didn't actually know how far the ball was. The numbers that it spit out were based on how it had been calibrated to decide what 700 meters was an appropriate response to. These two aspects of the device's functioning, sensing the ball and displaying a number based on that, should be almost completely separate from each other. The sensor could be working perfectly, but if the display system had an error, it would still show the wrong number or no number at all regardless. It would be unfortunate if the device was incorrect. So if I could just curse it with a sort of error that would show a wrong number. "Dude, you okay? You've been muttering up a storm there," the boy with spiky red hair that stood next to him asked in a worried voice. It jolted Izuku out of his thought process. He turned to the boy to wave him off, his smile becoming embarrassed to match the red on his cheeks. And it was embarrassing. He had gotten so into it that his old habit resurfaced. "I am sorry about that. That just happens when I think too hard sometimes." The boy gave him a smile full of sharp teeth that Izuku found it more joyful than intimidating. "Hey, it's no problem. It's no wonder you'd be so worried about these tests." His expression morphed into one of worry as brought his hand up to shield his mouth and whispered, "I can't believe our teacher's gonna expel the student that does the worst. It's only the first day. How brutal can you be?" "What? Yeah, that's really rough." Izuku responded as though he had any idea about what his classmate was talking about. What the hell had he missed in the middle of thinking too hard? The last place students getting expelled. What? Apparently, it was new enough knowledge that his classmates were still contesting Eraserhead about it. "It's only the first day." Uraraka repeated the redhead's objection, looking at Eraserhead with her fists clenched as a sign of her earnestness. "I mean, even if it weren't, that's totally unfair." Eraserhead's matter-of-fact tone was void of sympathy for their plight. Natural disasters, highway pileups, rampaging villains. Calamity is always right around the corner. I'd say Japan is full of unfair things. "Mom, I'm leaving for school now. And, the mirror broke again. Sorry. It's okay, sweetie. That's why we bought so many extras. Have a nice day. I love you, dear. A bitter pain stabbed his chest. Behind his insincere smile, Izuku felt his teeth clench. He doesn't need to be told that. Heroes are the ones who correct that unfairness. Eraserhead interrupted his musings. For the next 3 years, UA will run you through the ringer. That's plus ultra. Use your strength to overcome it. Izuku paused at that thought. Heroes are the ones who correct unfairness. Is that really true? There's nothing a hero could have done to heal his mother in the hospital. But maybe, just maybe, if there had been one at the scene, they could have rescued her from that crash. At the very least, a hero could have saved Izuku from trying to kill himself, but there were none there. Only Hitoshi was there. There's nothing a hero could have done to prevent Izuku from being born with the quirk he has, but maybe they could change the way society views villain quirks. But everyone told Kaken growing up that his quirk was amazing. Because it was exactly the sort of quirk that suited heroes, the sort of quirk that many of the flashier heroes advertised as being good. So is it even possible for a hero to change that thinking? When the majority of the hero industry unintentionally supports it. That's not the kind of thing Izuku has the luxury of internally debating at the moment, though. The first event was the 50-meter dash. Ada's quirk, which Izuku guessed were the engines in his legs, proved to be suited for it, finishing in little over 3 seconds. The classmate who raced him, a frog girl Eraserhead called Asuitsuyu, finished in a little under 6 seconds. The cheerful Uraraka's quirk was less suited for it, but she still tried to utilize it to the best of her ability, making her clothes weightless to shave a few Deciscons off her 7 seconds. Is he friends with Uraraka now? Is he socially allowed to ask that? Wait, not the time to worry about that. Of course, Izuku was paired with Katsuki for this event, because his luck is never allowed to be favorable. Izuku thought it'd be a better idea to withhold using his quirk and had to keep himself reacting to Katsuki's goading smirk as he blasted his way to finish in around 4 seconds. Izuku, on the other hand, finished at an average time of around 7 seconds. He noted that the device for this event, which could possibly be used for other tests, declared this verbally in an artificially cute voice rather than on a display screen. Thinking back to his previous worry about whether he'd be cheating by boosting Jinx's energy with his now satanic accessories, Izuku stopped by Eraserhead before moving to the second event. Before he could even get a word out, the hero took one glance at how the orientation of his earrings changed and said, "It's fine." But I didn't. You were very thorough in your official quirk description, which is helpful for UA. I already noticed you were wearing those earlier and could guess why. There's nothing wrong with taking advantage of how your quirk can benefit from simple changes in clothing or accessories that you normally wear. Consider this a natural result of coming to the first day of the heroics course properly prepared. How does Aizawa-sensei always seem to know what he's thinking? It's scary and intimidating. Izuku felt his smile become somewhat sincere as he thought of telling Hitoshi all of this later. Hitoshi will be pleased to know what Eraserhead is like in person. The second event, the grip strength test, Izuku would use for the first true test of his quirk. He examined the display on the grip device carefully. It was set to show 3 digits above the decimal point and 1 digit after the decimal point in kilograms. Placing the dynamometer in his right hand, Izuku clenched up to grip as tight as he could. It displayed 48 kilograms. This was a good setup for him. Due to the many possible digit combinations, it would take a large amount of energy to glitch the device so that it shows a specific number. However, if I glitch the device so that it momentarily shows a random number instead, theoretically every possible digit combination has an equal chance of appearing, as he thought to himself, being careful to not speak them aloud this time. Izuku raised his left hand. I want a number above 50 kilograms, and the device goes all the way up to 999.9 kilograms. Just based on the distribution of numbers, the chance of getting a number above 50 is very high. He snapped his left hand. Internal mantra in his head shouting, "Don't break it, don't break it, don't break it." The screen lit up into nonsense for one heart-stopping second. Then, it settled to display a new series of numbers, 424.2, which is an unlucky number. Verbally it could be the word die repeated twice, but beggars can't be choosers. Whoa, you got over 400 kilograms. That's close to Shaoji's score, and he's ripped and using 3 hands. His attention jolted to a group of 3 classmates beside him. A boy with black hair and very straight teeth was pointing at his dynamometer, presumably having been the one that noticed, while another large boy wearing a mask and featuring 6 arms was still in the middle of using his own but was still looking at Izuku in interest. Izuku had to keep himself from shying away. A much shorter boy with strangely shaped hair squinted his eyes at him, commenting, "You don't look like you have a strength quirk. Do you just have a kind that doesn't give you muscles?" "I don't have a strength quirk at all, or anything like that really." They all looked surprised at that. The short boy objected, "It's gotta be a quirk. Even if you were a master masturbator, you wouldn't be able to get that kind of grip." How does he even explain this? Wait, Master Masturbator. What is this guy even thinking about? Why? Izuku tastefully chose to pretend like he hadn't heard that last sentence, but the first boy couldn't restrain himself from switching his attention over to the other to say, in a voice that was obviously trying and failing not to laugh, really, Minta? Why would you even bring that up? TFF, if you actually went at it that hard, you'd end up crushing your Shoji Mezu, 540 kilograms. Midoriya Izuku, 424.2 kilograms. Eraserhead hesitated before stating Izuku's score. When he and the other boys swerved their heads towards their teacher in unison, Izuku caught the man give him an evaluating glance. He recognized the cursed number just as well as Izuku had. I dislike small talk during my classes in general, but will tolerate them to some extent for appropriate occasion. Inappropriate remarks are never tolerated. Do you understand this? He glared down at Minta as he said this. The boy paled drastically and gave a jittery nod. Good, because if I ever have to hear the word masturbate spoken in my presence by a teenager ever again and it's your fault, I will expel you. Washing his hands of the matter, Eraserhead turned his back to stalk away, ignoring the frightened cries of the child behind him. The other boy that he didn't catch the name of yet also looked shaken. Seeing that he was done with his test, Izuku quickly put some distance between him and Minta. Hearing the rustling of movement behind him, Izuku looked over his shoulder to see that Shoji was also vacating the area. All the other boy said at his look was an exhausted sigh of, Minta claimed that octopuses are sexy earlier. Izuku just barely kept his face from twitching. He nodded to Shoji. Nothing more needed to be said than that, really. The third event was the standing long jump, and it was another test that Izuku could use what he was now mentally referring to as the random number generator glitch strategy. The recording device was able to measure velocities and produce lengths much larger than an average long jump, so the same method as what he used for the grip test should apply. The only difference was that the machine was the same as the one used in the 50-meter dash, so it was made to communicate the results verbally rather than visually. But doesn't that sort of change everything? Is this even going to work right? Oh crap, he's already up next. Izuku took a deep breath, then jumped as far as he could. He snapped his fingers a second later as he landed in the dirt. He immediately had to place his hands over his ears as an unholy screech resonated from the speakers of the device. In a distortable, almost demonic, electronic tone, it blared out. 6 centimeters. Then the noisy sound of feedback abruptly cut off. The silence that followed is deafening. After a few seconds of staring at the measuring device, Izuku slowly set his gaze on Eraserhead. He had to contain a wince when he caught sight of a nearby classmate with a bird head, who had been set to go after him, staring at the thing like it was possessed. Eraserhead just stared back at him with an expression that was both deadpan while also perfectly communicating his internal sentiment of what the fuck. Scratch that. Jinx isn't making them into random number generators, it's making them cursed number generators. Though now he's wondering if he wouldn't be able to get 666 if the machine spoke Chinese. That number's supposed to be lucky in that language due to its pronunciation, right? This is exactly why he can never tell what things his quirk will react to. He can't learn every superstition in every culture. With his discontent properly conveyed to Izuku, Eraserhead looked down at his electronic notepad to record the score. His dark eyebags seemed even more prominent during this action than they had been previously, and he sighed. Next time, try not to make it so obvious, please. He moved on to the next event, sidestepping, and what do you know, it uses the same fucking machine. What does UA have against the traditional and highly valued method of displaying results visually? He doesn't know how the hell he's supposed to change what his quirk's doing in a way that will make the thing sound normal. Damn it. Within the span of 1 minute, Izuku stepped side to side for as many times as he could. And right when the minute was up, he snapped his fingers with a vague thought of random number but try not to sound creepy while saying it. His condition only somewhat succeeded. The machine was able to retain its usual cutesy voice, but it still sounded distorted and disjointed as it hissed out cheerfully, 4 cycles. How did it still pronounce it like she when it's been pronouncing it the normal way with yawn? You know what? Never mind, he doesn't want to know. But if you're going to chant death at him, at least make it a good score. That's only just above average. That's when Izuku realized that this was the fourth test, and he had been trying to hold back the bad luck to make it not break and be even more cursed. The extra energy reflected back on him. He should have changed his earrings. Again, why does this superstition stuff have to be so complicated? He bets no one else has to count the number of exercises that they've done, or never ever try to guess at what the answer of the fourth multiple choice question on his tests are. He never guesses right if he does, and Satan forbid if he tries to guess at the 13th question. It's so inconvenient. The next event was the softball throw, and it would also be his fourth snap, making an on-the-spot decision. Izuku turned his earrings right side up again to hopefully balance out the extra bad luck that he knew would come from it. It would do him no good if he outright broke the recorder on accident, or the bad luck gave him a bad score. As he stepped up to the pitching area, Izuku's anxiety broiled in his gut. Because of the ample space on the field, the majority of the students were simply watching each other go up one by one. Izuku had been, dare he think it, lucky that he'd gone mostly unnoticed this whole time. This was clearly the time when that luck would end, as it always does. He took a deep breath, clenching the softball in his right hand. Then, he hurled his arm to throw as far as he could. Carefully tracking it in the air, he snapped his fingers just before it hit the ground. The device for this round was the same handheld device that Eraserhead had used for the demonstration, a small mercy. When the screen presumably settled on a number, he turned it towards Izuku out of courtesy and repeated the number shown on the display out loud, 1,313 meters. It was an excellent score, cursed, certainly, but still excellent, and it also was no way close to the measly 50-some meters that the softball had actually gone. What the fuck? Predictably, Katsuki was the first one to yell out. Izuku winced through his smile at the sight of him emerging from the crowd of students enraged. Deku, what the hell do you think you're doing? You can't beat my throw by fucking cheating. Are you trying to piss me off? Why does he have to make everything Izuku does be about him? Izuku shoved down the thought down into the box inside him where he kept all his painful and bitter thoughts. I'm not cheating, Izuku claimed, even though he had had the same thought himself earlier. I'm doing what I can to get the best results for the exercises using my quirk, like I'm supposed to. How exactly is your quirk doing this anyway? It was like that for the grip test too. The boy that Izuku now knew to be Zero mused, head tilting to the side in confusion. Certainly this score does not match the actual throw. Are you using your quirk to influence the measuring device? Is that not a violation of the rules? Ada spoke up with a raised hand. Not as accusingly as he had acted this morning, but still speaking with concern. The rest of his classmates shared his sentiment, looking confused by the scene. They began to whisper amongst themselves, and Izuku's body tensed at their stares, body frozen in place. He knew that this was allowed, he knew it was fine, but the guilt rose in him anyway because he thought the same way as them, that this wasn't the right way to do things. Why would it be against the rules? That strategy is perfectly within the guidelines, Aizawa-sensei told us. A tall girl with a high ponytail spoke up above the muttering. Izuku's thoughts paused, not expecting that response. Yaoyorozu's right. As he already stated, he's doing exactly as he's supposed to. Eraserhead's tone of finality put an end to the gossiping and Izuku's own inner turmoil. He glanced up at the hero to see him look over the crowd with narrowed eyes. Listen up, because I'm only going to say this once. Out of all the examinees in the practical exam this year, there was only one of you that could be named the top scoring student, and that student, he pointed a finger at Izuku, is standing right in front of you. He beat every single one of you who wasn't part of the recommendation student test. Everyone's attention narrowed even further on him at that. Izuku saw Katsuki's jaw drop in shock, but he himself just continued to stare at Eraserhead in surprise. But it also just so happens that he has a quirk that is completely useless at performing these exercises better. This isn't a unique thing. I know for a fact that some of you had to do things during these exercises that many would consider cheating, making items that can do the test better than you, deceiving the sensors visually. Those were all fully viable strategies, just the same as the kind Midoriya used. He gave them all a careful look over once more. That seemed to make them all nervous. Those of you that have physically oriented quirks, remember this, you have a quirk that fits the mold of a hero. That's good for you. But others have to get by using different ways, become different kinds of heroes. Do not assume that just because you can get things done the traditional way while he cannot that you are going to become a better hero than him. If the practical exam can be taken as an indicator, he's already got a head start on you. So instead of thinking that he shouldn't be able to do things that way, think about how you can make your own creative leaps to improve your own quirks, just like what these exercises are trying to get you to do in the first place. Understood. All of his classmates straightened up at his prompt and let out a resounding, "Yes, sensei." Well, all of them except one. Izuku knew the bomb would go off right when it did. You, Deku. Katsuki charged at him with a roar, palms already ablaze and stretched out towards him. You can't beat me. Izuku tensed in preparation, but it was unnecessary. White wrappings tied around Katsuki within a second, and the explosive power of his hands suddenly let out. He chanced a single glance away to see that Eraserhead was pulling at the bindings and glaring at Katsuki with red eyes. Did you even hear a word I said? Stand down. Eraserhead pulled harshly on his capture gear in time with that last word, making Katsuki stumble back and off the offensive. His old friend's angry red eyes were now solely focused on their teacher in a scowl. And stop thinking he can't beat you when he already has. You're nowhere near the top of the totem pole in this industry, you're not even hero yet, so stop acting like you are. The weapon released its hold on Katsuki, but Eraserhead walked up to stare him down. It was clear from his tone that he was trying to convey the seriousness of the situation. If you try assaulting him in front of me like that again when it's not part of my lesson plan, Don't be shocked when I kick you out of my class." Izuku's mouth involuntarily dropped open with the widening of his eye, the shock ringing through his system so thoroughly that he couldn't even spare a thought to trying to keep it from showing. Because out of all his years of school, he has never had a single teacher that would choose unlucky Izuku over the future hero Katsuki. They weren't cruel, they just didn't care. As long as Katsuki wasn't making his bullying too noticeable, they would turn a blind eye, because why would they want to mar the record of such a promising future? Izuku was going nowhere in life while Katsuki would be headed to the stars. It was obvious which student they should invest in. Stop looking so surprised. The sound of his new teacher's voice brought Izuku back to the moment. He snapped his mouth shut and glanced at Eraserhead to find that he was looking over Izuku in a meticulous examination. He had come closer so that he could speak privately. This is the bare minimum of what safeguards a teacher should have in place for all their students. Now get off the pitch. I need to move on to the next student. Why, yes, sir. Izuku mindlessly returned to the crowd. He didn't even know what to think about. But a gentle hand on his forearm drew his attention. He raised his eyes up to see Uraraka smiling softly at him. You're not smiling like you were before. I'm sorry if we upset you. A lot of them probably just didn't expect someone to do things that way. It didn't occur to me as an option, either. Uraraka pumped a fist with the hand not holding Izuku. I still have no idea what your quirk is, but it's great that you can think outside the box like that. You must be really smart. And it's so cool that you scored the most points on the practical. You did really good on this test. So don't let things get you down, okay? Izuku blinked once at her, as he remembered that people don't like it when you don't look like you're happy. And he put a small smile back on. It didn't really feel real, but it didn't feel fake, either. The way that Uraraka was telling him that he had done good made his chest too warm for it to be completely insincere. That's high praise coming from the girl that scored an infinity. You know, that just means that I know what I'm talking about. She insisted with a nod. Seeing that Izuku was happy again, she removed her hand. But the warmth of her presence standing beside him still remained. The exercises after that passed like a breeze. The sit-ups and seated toe touch didn't use electronics to record the score. And in long-distance running a lower time was wanted, which was ill-suited for Izuku's method. His anxiety grew at having to go so many tests without being able to use his quirk, and it stirred at the glimpses he caught of Katsuki fuming while avoiding him. He just had to hope that his results for the grip test, the standing long jump, and the softball throw were enough put him above last place. But he also had to be careful to watch his quirk when thinking that. He disliked wishing misfortune onto others, because there was always the chance he might accidentally curse them with his mental mutterings. He didn't want to be last, but he didn't necessarily want someone else to be expelled, either. But as it turned out, that didn't even matter in the slightest. I was lying about expelling someone. It was just a logical ruse to get you all to do your best, Eraserhead said nonchalantly, as though that was a normal thing teachers did. Anyway, here are your final results. While most students were still shouting screams of disbelief, with one girl, Yaoyorozu Momo, being the only one to say it was obvious, the rankings were displayed on the screen in front of them. Izuku placed in the latter half of the class but wasn't last. That ranking was given to Minoru, who looked absolutely relieved that he had been saved by the skin of his teeth. It was only then that Izuku realized that, actually, this was a wasted opportunity. If Eraserhead had expelled the last place student, that meant there would have been a chance for Hitoshi to join the class. It's sort of pointlessly cruel, thinking such things when Hitoshi hadn't even had the chance to prove himself yet. But Eraserhead was Hitoshi's hero. Izuku could only imagine how happy he would have been to hear there was a chance to get into a heroics class taught by him. In comparison, it was hard to think of how crushed Mindo would have been had that occurred. Excuse me, Midoriya-kun, is it? He shook himself out of his thoughts to look in the direction of the voice. Seeing that it was the invisible girl, Hagakure Toru he believed her name was, he did his best to focus on where her face should be located above her shirt. Hagakure seemed to be fiddling with the end of her shirt, based on how it was moving. Her high-pitched voice was subdued as she explained, I just wanted to let you know. The way I improved my scores was by tricking the sensors visually, like Aizawa-sensei mentioned. I was self-conscious about how I couldn't do better for real like everyone else was. So I was relieved to see that someone else was doing things that way too. I'm sure your quirk can do a lot more than that if you were able to get the top score on the exam. But don't feel like you're alone in doing things this sneaky way. By the end she seemed to gain confidence, as she stood up straighter and her tone became more insistent. Izuku felt his chest become a little lighter at her words. The fact that she went out of her way to speak to him about this already meant a lot. Thank you, Hagakure-san. I look forward to being classmates with you. The physical fitness tests took most of the day, so after changing they went straight to a late lunch. Basic class introductions flew by until it was the end of the school day. Izuku quickly said his goodbyes to Uraraka, who had continued socializing with Izuku along with their other classmates to his delight, and met up with Hitoshi near the door to the school. When his friend glanced down at his mouth, Izuku let the smile on his face drop, but there was still a slight curl left at the end from the excitement of knowing what would come next. Hitoshi raised his eyebrows at him as they walked through the school gates. You seem happy. Did you have a good first day? I saw that your class wasn't at the orientation, so I didn't really know what to think. Did Bakugo bother you? He did, Izuku admitted. Hitoshi scowled. Izuku, I don't give a shit about rules and quirk regulations. If he tries to hurt you, fight back. Defend yourself until he gets his ass punted out of the hero course. Please, don't think about it like that. He's not getting kicked out, but I'll try to look out for myself. He purposefully changed the topic with, also, Eraserhead is my homeroom teacher, so it's not all bad. He kept Katsuki from doing anything. He put us to work right away. What? For real? Hitoshi had to come to a halt to keep himself from stumbling. He turned to face Izuku directly. How was he? At this, a small smile natural grew on his face. He's scary, but he's also super cool. But he wouldn't give me an autograph for you, sorry. You asked him for his autograph. I can't believe you did that. Of course he said no. You know what he's like. But a hand came up to rub the chain around Hitoshi's neck, as the other glanced away from Izuku. It was then that Izuku realized Hitoshi was still wearing the rabbit's foot he had given him. I'm really glad you got him as your teacher. It's a relief to know you'll be taken care of properly. Looks like this thing is still working, then. You should stop by my class and meet him yourself, Hitoshi-kun. What? No way. I can't seek him out just cause I'm a fan. He doesn't like that kind of stuff, and it's too embarrassing. Hitoshi turned away to start stalking down the road towards the train station. Izuku caught up to him to hold Hitoshi's arm to his chest and walk with him. He ignored the red that appeared on his friend's face to chime. But Hitoshi-kun, he's really, really cool. I know you want to meet him really badly. You should have seen him when I said I wanted to use my quirk to cheat on my exercise scores. He was totally into the idea. And then he told off everyone for thinking that kind of thing wasn't a good way to be a hero and held off Katsuki. You get along with him so well. Stop trying to tempt me. My heart won't be able to handle a face-to-face meeting. But don't you want to try and get into his class? You should start trying to build up an immunity. Hitoshi had to mentally pause at that. Shit, if I get transferred, I might be put in his class. I don't know if that's a very good or a very bad thing. Why would it be a bad thing? Because it makes me nervous. Now there's even more mental pressure to get transferred, damn it. And if I get transferred but not into his class, I'm gonna be disappointed. Hitoshi sighed, and brought the arm that Izuku wasn't holding onto up to hold his face in his hand. I'm just trying to keep my expectations low so I don't get upset when nothing happens. But this'll make it hard. Izuku furrowed his brows with a frown, and hugged Hitoshi's arm tighter. I'm sure you'll get transferred, Hitoshi-kun. I know you've got what it takes, so it's only a matter of time. You'll get your chance. I'll make it so. Aizawa-sensei is great. Uraraka is great. The idea of becoming a hero is great, but that's not why he's here. He's here to see Hitoshi become a hero. So if Izuku needs to make that chance come into existence himself, he'll do so gladly. Aizawa-kun, how was that boy? Midoriya Izuku. When I heard about the kinds of tests you do on the first day, I was a little worried about how he'd perform. Shout aside as he was forced into interacting with the newest addition to the UA staff. He had wanted to make some last revisions to his notes in peace in the teacher's lounge, but it seemed like that would have to wait. He glanced up from the page in front of him to All Might's emancipated form standing tall next to him. Because his quirk's not suited for that. He's smart, so he thought around his limitations. All Might's thin mouth curved into a small smile. It was unusual to see the hero that was usually defined by his smile normally didn't hold it all the time. But Shouta supposed that was just proof that he was human like the rest of them. He himself hadn't really been fond of how the number one was overly cheerful, so he supposed he should be grateful to not have to deal with it all the time. I see, that's good. If the man was going to bother Shouta about minor details like this, he might as well learn something from this conversation. Getting right to the point, he questioned, you have a specific interest in him, why is that? All Might's smile faltered for a second. Before he spoke past his hesitation, I ran into him a while back. He had incapacitated a villain that was attacking him before I arrived. He has a lot of promise, so I look forward to seeing him learn. Really now, I can see the logic in that, yeah. I just wasn't sure how interested you would be in teaching that kind of student, Shouta hummed noncommittally. Before he could turn back to his papers to signal the end of the conversation, All Might frowned in confusion and asked, what do you mean by that? Shouta sighed a second time, eyebrows pinching together. I mean that your type of hero is a completely different type than what he'll most likely become. You're straightforward, powerful enough to get the job done with strength alone most of the time, and have the best image of any current hero. The way I see it, Midoriya will be the exact opposite. His quirk has power if his practical exam is any indication. but he'll have more limitations in terms of fighting than having a quirk like yours instead. Glancing away, Shouta took the opportunity to communicate some of the uneasiness he felt about leaving students in the hands of this brand new teacher. To be honest, I'm concerned that you won't keep that kind of thing in mind for the students with less physical quirks. Training should always be individualized based on the quirk and style of each student. Will you know how to handle couching quirks that aren't suited for your style? This was a question that had arose in his mind as soon as he heard All Might was joining their staff, but it had turned from a vague annoyance into a pressing matter, and it was all because of the very same student they were discussing. One meeting with Midoriya Izuku was all it took to know that he was a student that will take a lot of work to teach, not in terms of physical performance, but in terms of strengthening the boy's mental fortitude. Shouta took a mental note of the number one student's behavior during the entirety of the physical tests. Shouta had had to reassure Midoriya it was okay to use his quirk. He wasn't used to having free reign with his quirk. He wasn't used to being treated the same as his peers, probably because of said quirk. And he was used to criticism and Bakugo's Katsuki's violent reactions. He'll have to keep an eye on Bakugo to make sure that any habits when it came to imposing himself over Midoriya that formed in middle school didn't continue. All this suggested that if an inexperienced teacher and highly respected hero like All Might happened to mention that he didn't personally like deceptive strategies like the one Midoriya used today, Midoriya would sabotage himself by purposefully not giving his all just so he could meet that standard. As a teacher whose job was to get students to live up to their full potential, that was an unacceptable outcome. All Might's frown deepened, but he kept his tone cordial when he responded, "My old sidekick was one of those types. I'm aware that different steps will have to be taken for different quirks. I know I'm not well versed in teaching, but I'll do my best to keep this in mind." That was the best Shouta could get from the other hero, he knew. The only way to see how All Might fared as a teacher was to let him teach. Shouta just had to hope that the hero could translate his experience into teaching material. And hopefully he won't freak out if Midoriya starts cursing the machinery again. "I am here," coming through the door normally. Izuku had to keep himself contained at the sight of All Might standing before him, in his Silver Age costume at that. While he had a relatively good first day, he had been nervous about returning to school, paranoid ideas about his new classmates and acquaintances suddenly hating him plaguing his sleep. That was put to rest when Uraraka and Ada both greeted him normally, but he was still nervously unfamiliar with most of the others in the class. Would any of them treat him differently when they learned he has a bad quirk? And not to mention he's still going to have to face Katsuki every day. Getting to see All Might in person once again cemented that no matter what, UA will be a positive experience for him. He should start looking forward to his school days instead of dreading them like he has been for so long. Hero basic training. Even though the years only just started, we're getting right into it. All Might energetically delivered his classic smile and thumbs up. He boomed in an unnecessarily loud voice. "Today we will be holding battle trials, where you team up and face off against your fellow classmates as heroes or villains." The frog girl Asui raised her hand to ask, "We aren't starting with basic training?" All Might kept his thumbs up strong as he declared, "Practical experience teaches you the basics." Is this really going to be okay? He doesn't really feel comfortable using his quirk to fight people, and to jump right into it without any training. It's so cutthroat. Is he really cut out for this? Dubious teaching methods aside, briefcases holding their costumes were distributed. Izuku felt his excitement return upon being told to change into his costume for the first time. This excitement increased once he opened the case in the locker room and took in his costume. He remembered how torn he was when designing it. He wanted to be like All Might. He wanted to be like the number one hero always was, with a reassuring smile that true heroes always wore and a bright, friendly costume to match. But at the same time, he didn't really want to be like that. If he were to become a hero for real, the thought of having to put a costume on every day and pretend to be something he wasn't just because it was more pleasant. It was exhausting just to think about. Almost as exhausting as keeping up the smile that he wore even when he didn't feel like smiling. Hero costumes are more than just an outfit heroes wear, it's a representation of who they are. Izuku lies to himself and others on a daily basis, but he knows who he is. He isn't bright, he isn't very happy, and he isn't All Might. Before he would have easily decided to just keep up the lie, but after meeting Hitoshi and having those moments where he could just let himself be not happy, he doesn't really want his image of who he is as a hero to be a lie. Even if he can't be true to himself in his everyday life, he wants to at least be true to his dreams. Superstitions could be all over the place, but he had wanted to make his costume reflect both his quirk and be cohesive, so he decided on a theme. Throughout history, many unexplained happenings were explained away by blaming it on superstitions. Yakai or Oni, restless spirits, the monsters in the dark, and of course, when misfortune struck and it seemed like things were cursed, many would blame black magic, witchcraft. The history of witch hunts in the Western sphere throughout various countries was so prominent, people all around the world still knew of them. When he first learned about witch hunts and how many innocent people, especially women, were accused of things outside of their control and put to death for them, he had been sick. He couldn't help but compare it to how often his own peers would accuse his bad luck of ruining things for them. And he had the vague realization that, had this kind of thing survived to the age of Quirks, he very well might have been declared a witch as well. He put on the costume slowly, savoring the moment. The black tunic was made of a hardy material but ended in tatters that fell at his thighs. A green belt fitting snugly at his hips over the top of that was adorned with a silvery inverted pentagram. Its sleeves were long, flaring out to his mid-palm, and 2 unnecessary green belts were tightened onto each arm, one just below the wrist and one in the middle of his upper arm. They held inverted silver crosses that doubled as arm guards and could be detached and repositioned upright. The pants featured thick horizontal black and green stripes and fit neatly beneath the oversized mid-calf black boot, which was adorned with its own 2 unnecessary green belts. This set with upside-down silver horseshoes that could also be repositioned. The costume was finished off with black fingerless gloves with small protective metal plates set on the back of his hand, a black choker with a right-side-up silvery pentagram, and a hooded black cloak. He left the hood down and flipped one side over his shoulder so it didn't cover up all of his arm adornments, and took note of the green border that ended at the corners of the cloak. It seemed to be a design choice made by the costume manufacturers to make a definitive contrast that showed where the black of the shirt ended and the black of the cloak started. It also helped bring out the 2 big black buttons at the top, the upper of which he used to pin the cloak together. Rooting around the case fruitfully provided the extra accessories he had asked for. 13 small handheld mirrors, an entire roll of Curse o Mikuji, and a smaller roll of Blessing o Mikuji, all of which could be stored in the pockets hidden inside the cloak. An Eye of Horus amulet for his belt and an Ankh amulet for his choker, both in silver, to be switched out with the pentagrams if more luck was needed. And the piece de resistance in his opinion, a set of metallic silver earrings, starting in thick studs leading into a thin dangling chain, and ending with inverted crosses that stopped just above his choker. Izuku fiddled with them to find they could also be reattached as regular crosses and snapped off easily to prevent his ear from tearing in the case of pulling. After putting all of this on, Izuku found a full-length mirror and stared at himself up. He left everything in their unlucky positions, so overall, he looked like a satanic witch without a witch hat. He gently tapped one of his earrings, then watched the cross swing back and forth like a pendulum. This looks so cool. The support company should be proud. They really went above and beyond what he asked for. They gave him all the extra stuff without a problem, added on to plain black cloak design he submitted, and he hadn't even considered making the earrings into dangling earrings. The crosses look so much cooler like that. Maybe one of their designers is a goth. He snapped a picture with his phone to send to Hitoshi, as his friend had asked for, and found that he had a real smile on his face. He felt a bit like a little kid on Halloween, being so excited to dress up like a witch. But he wouldn't let shame ruin the brilliant irony of a potential hero with a quirk that curses, jinxes, hexes, and etc. having a witch theme. It was too good of an opportunity to pass up. And looking at himself now, he thinks it paid off. He doesn't really look like a hero, but he looks like himself. He wished Mom was here to see it. In total, the outfit had 12 different charms that could be set to or replaced to be either lucky or unlucky. But having them all at unlucky now, he could feel how powerful the combined amplification is. It was almost like his quirk was on overdrive, producing so much misfortune that it strained the barrier of his skin. And he could easily see himself producing 12 days' worth within the course of a single day at the rate he felt it increasing. It was too much to handle comfortably, bordering on being painful, so he kept an even half and half mixture of good to bad omens to neutralize each other. It worked for the most part. 6 was unlucky and the 2 separate groups made double 6s. So Jinx was still slightly producing more than usual. An unlucky combination of 13 charms would probably have a huge effect. That might be dangerous, but it might also be needed. He should think of one more to add, so that it's a full 13. All his obsessing over his outfit led to Izuku being the last to leave the locker room. As he approached the colorful, bright group set within the facade of his city, he became more self-conscious about himself. He kept his smile strong even when it wanted to fall off his face. The first person to glance at him was Uraraka. Her eyes widened as she waved him over. "Whoa, Deku-kun, is that you? You look really different." His thought process derailed as he took in what she called him, and he couldn't keep his expression from falling into a neutral one. Turning around to face her, she still smiled at him cheerfully though. "You give off a totally different vibe than usual. Even though your face isn't covered, I almost couldn't tell it was you." My name's not Deku. I'm Midoriya Izuku," he awkwardly interrupted. Uraraka blinked in surprise. "Oh, but that guy was calling you that the other day, so I thought. That's just Katsuki's mean nickname." "Oh, I'm sorry." Her eyebrows furrowed in concern, and her smile fell into a frown. I thought it was meant to be short for Deku like do your best, so I liked it. But I won't call you that anymore. Izuku forced a smile past his internal tension to say, thank you, I appreciate that. Your costume looks very nice, like a pink astronaut. This helped encourage Uraraka to return to her positive attitude, as she looked down at herself with slight embarrassment. Thanks, I wasn't specific enough so it's sort of tighter than I wanted, but I think it looks good. Your costume's really cool and unique. I don't know any heroes that look like a witch. Thanks. All Might went on to explain the exercise. They would be paired up, and then one team would face off against another, with the hero's goal being to capture the villains or their weapon and the villain's goal being to avoid this for until the timer runs out at 15 minutes. And the villains got 5 minutes of prep time to set up their base a little. The teams and who they fight against will be decided by drawing random lots. Oh shit. Izuku immediately turned the rest of his charms right side up, though he didn't bother with taking off the pentagrams when he would just have to put them back on right after. He made a mental note to himself to update his costume to have some way to do this automatically, since it would be inconvenient to have to stop and flip them all one by one manually in a real-life scenario. The only thing he had been really hoping for was to not be put with Katsuki, one student out of 19 total possibilities, so Izuku had pretty good odds for that one. And his cautiousness paid off greatly when not only was he not put with Katsuki, he also ended up being put on the same team as Uraraka. But then came time to draw for what teams were set against each other. Izuku glimpsed Katsuki glaring at him out of the corner of his eye, clearly wishing for a chance to prove himself against Izuku by beating the crap out of him in a school-sanctioned lesson. Once again, Izuku thought of witch hunts and proverbially burning at the stake. The anxiety drove his thoughts to more cunning ideas. I don't give a shit about rules and quirk regulations. If he tries to hurt you, fight back. Defend yourself until he gets his ass punted out of the hero course. Please. There are only 9 teams other than Izuku's. A 1 in 9 chance stands between Katsuki getting what he wants. Izuku doesn't think he can leave this to luck. Even with his lucky amulets, he doesn't trust them to overcome his misfortune. Izuku doesn't want to fight Katsuki. He doesn't want Katsuki to hurt him. He's scared of the idea of Katsuki hurting him, and the thought that Hitoshi would see that at the end of the day and get upset over Izuku's pain. He just really wants to avoid the possibility of that happening at all. He turned his earrings, 2 horseshoes, and 2 crosses back upside down so that he had 8 bad omens versus 4 good ones, which were weakened by the unlucky amount. Since Katsuki was obviously wishing for his team to be put against Izuku's, Izuku directed as much of his bad luck at Katsuki as he could without snapping, and thought, don't let him get the team he wants. It really felt like cheating. But Izuku wouldn't get an advantage by doing this, he tried to reason. This was just damage control. Hitoshi told him to use his quirk if he needed to, so he will. And honestly, he's doing All Might a favor, preventing a serious fight from breaking out. But that doesn't mean he's not influencing the outcome of what was supposed to be a random draw. It's just like his old classmates would always accuse him of doing. But he feels safer, doesn't he? Knowing that he has a hand in the luck played to him. He had never felt safe at his old school, where he never purposefully used his quirk. Izuku held his breath when All Might drew the first lot. When he pulled out the ball for Team D, Katsuki and Ada, he waited through a tense couple of seconds as All Might pulled out the next ball. It read Team J, for Kirishima and Shiro. He let air flow back into his lungs with a relieved sigh and stopped the flow of bad luck towards Katsuki. Ironically, Katsuki didn't even seem to suspect that Izuku played a part in this, he just grimaced at the missed opportunity. The expression made Izuku feel like he made the right decision. The rest of the class watched the fight from a monitoring room. And as he predicted due to Katsuki's presence, the battle destroyed a good amount of the building's interior. Ada stayed behind to guard the bomb while Katsuki went on the offensive, trying to fight both his opponents at once by himself, a very Katsuki move. He underestimated the strength of their new classmates, as Kirishima's quirk seemed to harden him up enough to withstand Katsuki's explosives. Due to Katsuki having to focus on Kirishima, Shiro was allowed to slink away to the bomb. His attempt to capture the weapon from a long range was foiled by Ada swiftly intercepting and pulling him into the room by his own tape. Katsuki, either frustrated or energized at having a real opponent, shot off a cannon from his arm bracer that would surely kill an average person. Luckily, Kirishima estimated that it was above the limitations of his quirk and dodged out of the way. But an entire side of the building was decimated. All Might order Katsuki to not use it again. Izuku once again had the thought that he had been very right to avoid getting set against Katsuki. Eventually, both Kirishima and Shiro were captured, and Katsuki was given an unsatisfying win. Izuku knew that in Katsuki's eyes failing to win by himself was the same thing as not winning at all. The presumed insult was aggravated by Yaoyorozu calling him out on abandoning teamwork to fight by himself and biting off more than he was able to handle. Izuku made sure to place himself on the opposite side of the crowd from Katsuki and his permeating rage. He did feel some satisfaction, though, at seeing Katsuki realize there was more to life than what he wished for. He had always been so very lucky. It will do him good to see that winning won't always get him what he wants. He pushed that bitter thought down into that little box inside himself, like many others. He took note of the next fighter's quirks. The location was changed to a different building that had the exact same design as the previous one. Todoroki, who Izuku was pretty sure was Endeavor's son, was so powerful that he just froze the entire building with his opponents inside, only needing his partner Shaoji's help in confirming their location. Hagakure and her tailed partner Ajiro couldn't do anything to fight back. He achieved exactly the kind of win that Katsuki had wanted, and Izuku could see from Katsuki's shadowed face that it burned him even further. Izuku supposed that as a recommendation student and the number 2 hero's son, Todoroki might even be above Katsuki's level. He held back the thought that it was also good that Katsuki see that, too. That was when his team was finally drawn, being set up against Team H, which featured the bird-headed kid Tokoyami and Asui Tsuyu. Team A was, of course, made the villains of the assignment. Technically it gave them the advantage, but he still thought it was his luck at work. Before they left the monitoring room, Izuku hesitantly went up to All Might to ask, "Excuse me, All Might Sensei, but, would you say that, if this was a real scenario with real villains, that they would prioritize keeping the bomb over the sanctity of their hideout?" All Might tilted his head in a slightly questioning manner, but responded positively with, "That would be a fair assumption to make, as long as they avoided damaging the bomb." Oh good, that meant it would be okay when he wrecked the place. Izuku made an effort to give a bigger smile. "Thank you for the clarification." As he and Uraraka made their way to the building along with the other team, Izuku realized that Tokoyami started falling into step with him. Izuku glanced at him. He also wore a black cloak, though it didn't have a hood. Both their cloaks bellowed behind them slightly as they walked. While Izuku absent-mindedly noted this, he had been much more preoccupied with another more obvious observation. This close-up, he could feel some energy radiating from Tokoyami, like he was an unlucky black cat. His head must be a crow's head, then. Hopefully it wasn't affecting him personally. Izuku felt himself tense up when Tokoyami gave him a lofty red-eyed stare, but didn't let it show on his face. "I see that the two of us are like-minded. Reveling in the dark, this will be our fated battle. I look forward to divining your true power for myself." He nodded, as though that was all that needed to be said, and dramatically walked away. It would have made an intimidating sight, had it not been for Asui trailing him while looking back and forth between her partner and Izuku in confusion. While the two of them made their way up the stairs of the base, Uraraka also voiced her confusion. Do you know what that was about, Midoriya-kun? Do you know Tokoyami-kun?" He has no idea what that was about. "I don't know him, but it was probably just one of those things, you know." "One of those things?" "Yeah, one of those things." There was an awkward pause, before Uraraka finally breached the question that Izuku had been dreading. "You never really told me what your quirk is." "You don't have to give any details, but I want to be able to work together with you properly. Do you mind giving me a basic description?" Uraraka recovered from the atmosphere, giving a bright smile and placing a hand on her chest with her pinky lifted in the air. "I'll go first. My quirk is zero gravity. Whatever I touch with all 5 of my finger pads won't be affected by gravity, which is how I got such a good score on the softball test. I can do this with multiple things, but using it on myself makes me nauseous and I have a weight limit. To cancel the effect, I have to press the fingertips of both my hands together." It was a good amount of information to go off of for strategizing purposes. She was probably being more open to encourage him to share, as though she could sense his reluctance. This would be the moment of truth. "My quirk is Jinx. It produces energy in the form of bad luck." Izuku tried to keep his voice steady and light as he explained, but he watched her reaction carefully. "Unlucky items increase the effect, while lucky items decrease it. When I inflict the energy on a target, it can produce a variety of unfortunate events, but it's most efficient at breaking things." Uraraka's eyes widened, and she let out a sound of realization. "Oh, that's why you're a witch and have all those horseshoes and stuff. And that's how you changed your scores in the exercises, and caused lightning to strike." She trailed off at the end, and her eyes glanced up at the ceiling in thought. "That must be some seriously strong bad luck if you can do that kind of thing." Izuku's smile became strained. "I know, it's sort of finicky in terms of control, sometimes, but I promise I won't let it affect our chances at winning." She immediately looked back at him to wave him off. "Oh no, of course not. Just because your quirk makes bad luck doesn't mean you're bad luck." She clenched her fists at her chest and gained a competitive grin. "I'm actually really happy I got you as a partner, both because we're friends and I know you're strong. We'll win this." Warmth filled his chest at her insistence, and at her reaffirmation that they were still friends. It seemed like she hadn't even considered the idea of discarding him. It made him not want to correct her misconception about him not being bad luck. Instead, as they reached the top floor where the bomb was placed, he tried to match her mindset of wanting to win. The room was set in the very center of the floor and was spacious, containing multiple cement pillars that were as bland as the chipped tiling on the ground. I think this will be a good location to keep the bomb. The most likely route they'll take is through the inside of the building, so they'll have to come all the way up here first. Reaching into his cloak, Izuku pulled out his new roll of curse omikuji and started unrolling it. He's glad he had the foresight to ask for this kind of support item. I already confirmed with All Might that damaging the base is fine, so how do you feel about booby trapping the place a little? Uraraka gained a somewhat mean grin that he hadn't seen from her previously. Sounds great. They rushed to finish, and once they were done, the floor and walls of the room were covered in interspersed cursed omikuji seals of different ranks. The bomb itself was encircled by great blessing omikuji on the floor surrounding it and around its paper mache by. Upon his confession at the possibility of friendly fire and Uraraka's agreement, they also stuck a great blessing omikuji on the back of her costume. They also briefly discussed what they'd seen of Asui and Tokoyami's quirks, namely that Asui apparently could do what frogs can do, and that Tokoyami had some sort of shadowy figure that did many of the exercises for him. While they had also wanted to go search for random items that Uraraka could use as ammunition, the 5 minutes passed by too quickly. The timer started, and the heroes presumably entered the building. Uraraka stood beside the doorway, waiting to ambush their incoming opponents in hopes of using her quirk on one of them. Izuku stood just in front of the bomb so that it wasn't completely uncovered and had a good view of the whole room. It took a couple of minutes just for the two to get to their floor, which was what they hoped for, and they were quiet enough to hear the shuffle of fast footsteps. The first plan of attack failed when the door suddenly burst open via Raging Shadow Bird Demon, which featured sharp claws and glowing red eyes. It was frighteningly inhuman, like a horror movie ghost, and also very cool. Tokoyami really had a point when he'd said they both reveled in the dark. Uraraka reflexive retreated due to the unexpected sight, sounding a shocked yell, but Izuku was more distracted by the fact that currently Tokoyami wasn't producing bad luck anymore. When Tokoyami advanced into the room behind the shadow, he was careful to not run over the curse seals. Unfortunately for him, the curses themselves didn't do anything. They just helped Izuku aim more precisely so the whole floor didn't collapse and would help concentrate the energy to go deep. The structure that makes up the combination between the ceiling of a lower story and the floor of the story above it is usually about 30 to 35 centimeters thick. As long as he's specific enough and the energy was applied right, being concentrated and drawn to enhance weaknesses already present in the floor, 30 cms of wood and insulation would be simple to destabilize. He snapped his fingers, cursing Tokoyami while willing the floor beneath him to break and for him to fall. The energy was amplified by the curses surrounding him, acting as sinkholes to keep the energy contained within a limited area, and cracks instantly sprouted from the two omikuji nearest to where Tokoyami was. It shattered upon his weight. He felt through the floor, the ceiling of the floor below, and the intermediate space between them, only for the shadow to catch himself on the edge of the hole, and presumably catch Tokoyami with its other hand. It took more energy than it should have, considering Jinx didn't reach the full effect of what he wanted. He had already used a sizable amount yesterday from what he'd been storing previously, so that was concerning. Oh, that's it. There's two of them. That means they're lucky now, everything has changed. He could always count on superstition complications to make his life harder. During this time Asui entered the room by crawling on the wall, also avoiding the omikuji. Seeing that Tokoyami was pulling himself up and Uraraka was approaching him, she bounced off the wall to defend him from behind. Izuku snapped before she landed, and the floor she hopped onto also broke. She fell through, failing to catch herself on the ledge. But as the most mobile person here, she'd probably be back soon. The way they just fell through the floor, faces lit with a light surprise as their feet crunched through what should have been a perfectly stable floor, was actually sort of funny. It looked like what you would see from an old-style cartoon. Now that he's realizing that using his quirk doesn't have to be harmful, using it can be fun. It was like playing a prank, but the prank has an actual practical use. His stomach turned in disgust. No, it's not fun, and it's not funny. Into the box that thought goes. Tokoyami was back in the game. His shadow swiped at Uraraka to keep her at bay as the boy pulled himself back to his feet. When it looked like she was about to be clawed at, Izuku snapped, and the swipe missed. The shadow's arm was now in reach of Uraraka's hand, so she took the change to tap it. Nothing changed. The shadow continued to attack while advancing, because Izuku just realized it was already floating. Wow, neither of their quirks are fully effective against Tokoyami. Jinx really went for their team's second worst option since Katsuki was out of the running. While watching this, Izuku used his fourth snap on something that would take more energy. A deafening crack rang through the air as jagged lines appear on a hopefully non-weight-bearing pillar next to her, and it crumbled into large chunks. Uraraka-san, Only seconds after, he snapped again to make a large section of the floor collapse beneath Tokoyami to pause the shadow's advance, increasing the energy and using 4 omikuji this time instead of 2. It still was ineffective, as the demon of the lucky duo quickly dove to catch the other. However, it seemed like they were taken aback by something, since they stared blankly at each other while hovering in the air at the intermediate space between the 5th and 4th floor. Tokoyami-chan. Izuku heard Asui's croaky voice shout, a tongue threading through the hole he was in from beneath. It wrapped around Tokoyami and roughly threw him in the direction of the bomb. Internally, Izuku was impressed by the sheer strength it must take for a tongue to have the muscle capacity to throw a human being. Every day, quirks continued to amaze him. Uraraka had finished tapping most of her new ammo by this time, the gray blocks having rose into the air towards the ceiling. Tokoyami regained his composure midair to shoot his shadow forward with its claws outstretched, unfearing of Izuku literally sweeping out the floor beneath his feet in the few seconds he had airborne. And Uraraka brought her fingers together to exclaim, "Release." The sound of Izuku's 6th snap echoed with her voice. The demon effortlessly smacked most of the debris out of the way, but due to Jinx's curse, a cement chunk bigger than the size of his head was pushed back to fly into Tokoyami's unguarded chest. It knocked him out of the air with a choked gasp to fall onto the floor, and it distracted the demon enough to pause its advance and glance back. Seeing the way Tokoyami pushed the block off himself to clutch at his chest in pain, Izuku descended into guilt. "Are you oh?" The sound of a slap interrupted him. Izuku turned slightly to see that Asui had apparently creeped back into the room, and was by the hole in the floor closest to them with her tongue stretched out towards the bomb, but in Uraraka's grip. Asui floated up into the air like a balloon accordingly. Izuku felt himself pale. She had been so close to, and he didn't even realize. Uraraka tried to spin Asui around to throw her at the demon, but Asui's tongue wrapped itself around her wrist. Meanwhile, Tokoyami's shadow was encroaching on Izuku. He took a swipe to the shoulder that was strong enough to push him down to the floor while he snapped, this time specifically targeting his attacker. At the same moment, Uraraka happened to get a good enough angle to swing Asui into the shadow like a whip. It forced the shadow backwards with a huff, and it gripped Asui with an annoying glare. Asui, being extremely composed for someone that was literally in the claws of a demon, just stared up at it neutrally. "Dark Shadow, help Asui." The now named Dark Shadow pulled on Uraraka's grip on the tongue. It forced her to let go lest she be pulled along, but she didn't release Asui yet. Asui let herself be pulled back by Tokoyami, who had picked himself up to float at the back line. It gave him a moment to get back up and invert the rest of his crosses, but it was also favorable for his opponent. So 7th snaps will always be lucky to some extent, no matter how many bad omens he had on. Seeing that he needed more firepower and was running low, Izuku set his accessories to a 10 to 2 bad to good luck ratio. Dark Shadow charged forward once more. Uraraka sent the last of her pillar rocks at it, and Izuku snapped with the other nearby pillar in mind. While Dark Shadow flung away the debris, the huge crack ran through the base of the pillar. It tilted to the side, and like a pine tree in a forest, fell heavily in Tokoyami and Asui's direction. Tokoyami, still holding onto Asui, moved to dodge, but stumbled over a hole, barely catching himself before he fell. They were still in the way. Izuku had a moment of panic, before it was interrupted by Dark Shadow screeching and rushing back to catch the pillar before it fell. In a show of strength, it seemed like it was able to hold up the whole thing, though it trembled with effort. It threw off the pillar, inadvertently tearing the rest of it from its base and completely destroying a wall. And for the first time since the battle began, Dark Shadow yelled in a dissonant yet resonating voice, "Stop it with all the falling and bullet hell crap. This is so annoying." The buzzer sounded. All Might's voice came on over their communicators. "Time's up. The villain team wins." There was a tense pause of total silence. Then Dark Shadow gave a single roar of frustration, hands thrown in the air, and shrunk back into Tokoyami's shadow. Tokoyami himself frowned at the act, or at least, frowned as much as he could with a beak for a mouth. "Good job," Asui stated to them good-naturedly. While saying her thanks, Uraraka brought her fingertips together to release Asui and helped her stabilize on her feet. Asui also turned her head to look at her partner. "You did good too, Tokoyami-chan. It's too bad we lost." Tokoyami closed his eyes with a sigh. "'Twas not meant to be, I suppose. The mistress of fate was not in our favor today." Izuku rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. "Actually, if that had gone on longer, you might have won. I ran out of bad luck with that last move. I've been using it too often recently. So bad luck is your quirk. How mysterious." Tokoyami blinked his eyes open to stare at Izuku, who tensed under the attention. Indeed, the cursed ambience of this lair was menacing, as was the serene smile on your face as you cast your spells on us. "You have embraced your inner darkness and turned it into your power." Tokoyami clenched his fist and closed his eyes almost mournfully. "I can only hope one day I can do the same. For surely if the darkness of my soul is so deep, then so must be the power that dwells hidden inside. Had he still been smiling that whole time? That sounds really creepy, and he didn't even notice. And more importantly, he wouldn't really say that he's embraced his darkness so much as pretending it didn't exist in the first place, but Tokoyami wouldn't find that motivating, so he won't mention it. As they start down the stairs of the building, Izuku continued to speak to Tokoyami. You were a pretty poor matchup for me, though. What is Dark Shadow, exactly? Because, well, that reminds me, have you noticed that you have particularly bad luck or anything like that? Tokoyami's head twitched to the side in a bird-like manner as he thought about his answer. Dark Shadow is a sentient being of the night. I've often considered him to be a curse, but, admittedly in my daily life, I'm not struck by misfortune regularly. Why do you ask? Have you heard that crows are bad luck? With my quirk, I can tell that you're emitting that sort of energy, but it seems like it doesn't affect you, which is good. Tokoyami's eyes blinked in surprise for a second, before they narrowed as he brought a hand to his chest while nodding solemnly. Again, the manifestation of my soul's darkness permeates my existence. Well, that part would actually be in my favor concerning my quirk, but the superstition behind crows is more nuanced than that. Some cultures say that one crow is a bad omen, but two crows are a good omen. So when you have Dark Shadow out, both of you are lucky. Eyes widening, Tokoyami turned to stare at him in shock. It seemed like he was more surprised to hear this than he was to hear about being unlucky. Dark Shadow makes me lucky. Tokoyami's tone was incredulous. Seeing that he'd hit a nerve, Izuku kept his voice carefully casual. Since the misfortune doesn't affect you, neither does the good luck probably, but it still has an effect on my quirk. So yeah, I would say that he's making you lucky. Or rather, the two of you together are lucky. Tokoyami descended into quiet contemplation, staring down at the floor as they crossed the threshold to exit the building. Izuku knew it must have been a weird thing to be told, to know that something that you had considered a curse to not be the case. He wondered why Tokoyami thought of Dark Shadow like that. Did they not get along well? Was it because people were scared of him? Would people look at how his shadow was a literal demon, then say that he was meant to be a villain? That seemed like something that would happen. Demons are always considered to be dangerous, evil beings, but maybe it's just because I'm the type that likes reveling in the dark. But I think Dark Shadow's really neat, Tokoyami-kun. He was smiling still, but his words were true. Tokoyami blinked at him in surprise, before his brows furrowed in what seemed to be confusion. Is that so? Thank you. Though personally, I wouldn't think neat to be an accurate descriptor. Well, saying something's neat is just another way of saying it's cool, right? I suppose so. Tokoyami's expression lightened and he nodded his head in satisfaction. Your witching attire and amulets are also neat, then. Warmth bubbled inside his chest, and his smile became a little genuine. Thanks, I wasn't too sure about the design until I saw it for myself. I believe it was a smart choice. It conveys both power and the ironic twist of fate of a witch being amongst heroes. Right, that's exactly what I was going for. Though, I don't think fate has anything to do with it. Everything comes down to probabilities and luck. Like how even though me being unlucky is supposed to be a bad thing. But it'll end up being unlucky for the villains who fight me too. If he ever gets as far as fighting villains. That is, when I think about it in terms of how you were randomly chosen as my opponent, I suppose it wasn't my lucky day. Tokoyami cut himself off all at once to stare into the air ahead of them dumbly. Izuku even had to stop walking as the boy had paused mid-step. Before he could panic and ask what was wrong, Tokoyami rebooted himself to grab Izuku by the shoulder and pull him closer and glare seriously into his eyes. Izuku had to stop himself from tensing at the touch. Midoriya, repeat what I just said back at me. The very last part. Pardon, no questions. If we're truly aligned equally with the dark side, then you'll see this moment of brilliance as well. I'm sure of it. It wasn't my lucky day. Change it so you're talking about me instead. It wasn't your lucky day. Suddenly it hit him, and Izuku dropped his mouth open to say, it's not your lucky day. He stared at Tokoyami in excited bewilderment, not even bothering to keep up a fake smile. I could use that as a hero catchphrase against villains. It's so cool. Tokoyami looked less excited than Izuku, but he suspected that was just because his avian features hit it more. His hand on Izuku's shoulder tightened as he raised his other hand to curl into a fist. His voice was filled with energy, yes, the forbidding sense of menace those words exude. With the right tone they'll send shivers down your spine. Midoriya, promise me you'll utter those words to your opponent before a fight at least once, with feeling. It'd be a waste if you didn't. Trust me, I'll be trying to use that as much as possible. You're brilliant, Tokoyami-kun. You give me too much praise. I was merely building off your own words. In the background, Izuku could vaguely hear Asui speak. Tokoyami-chan and Midoriya-chan get along well, Kiro. Uraraka giggled slightly. Yeah, it looks like they really understand each other. I'm glad. The VIP for this battle isn't very clear-cut. Midoriya-san is the strongest contender, as his strategy and fast-acting quirk gave his team total control over the battlefield. But he was distracted in one critical moment that would have lost them their victory, and he had to rely on Uraraka-san dealing with the direct fighting. In contrast, his partner Uraraka-san had to rely on Midoriya's quirk, but did so in such a way that she was the perfect support for his abilities. She was their frontline fighter, even though her quirk was ill-suited for that role, to make up for Midoriya not being suited for that type of direct encounter. Their plan to simply hold back the hero team was sufficient given the advantage provided by Midoriya's quirk, but it failed to take into account the strength of their opponents. One could also criticize their lack of care when it came to destroying their base, but Midoriya-san did clarify that it wasn't a priority. The thing that gave the hero team the edge in the fight was the strength of Tokoyami's quirk, which was able to fight both Midoriya-san and Uraraka-san, as well as support Tokoyami-san when attacks were aimed at him. But because it had to keep diverting its attention between these two tasks, it couldn't overtake the villain team before the timer stopped. And Tokoyami didn't think of a different approach other than continuing their straightforward assault. Isui-san was also vital to Tokoyami-san by providing support where she could. However, while her plan to secure the weapon when attention was on him was theoretically sound, she failed in her execution. Overall, they were unable to overcome their disadvantage of the environment being in the villain team's favor. If I had to choose, though, I'd still name Midoriya as the VIP. Yaoyorozu concluded her long-winded analysis of the fight. After the first battle, others beside Yaoyorozu had been speaking their own opinions. But it seemed like something about Izuku's caught her interest enough that she spoke up again. Izuku had to keep his posture from tensing when her sharp eyes fell on him. You don't have to go into details, Midoriya-san, but I'm sure that some of our classmates still wouldn't be able to tell what your quirk is even after that showing. Am I right in that it has to do with inflicting bad luck? That would explain both your various charms and why the results of your quirk varied. Just based on our perspective, at times it would seem like nothing happened after your snap, when in actuality it helped manipulate events of the fight rather than simply destroy an object like the floor and those pillars. Am I wrong? Scary. So scary. She figured all that out from just that fight. People don't even think luck is real most of the time, let alone jump to the idea of a luck-based quirk. Is this what it takes to be a recommendation student if you don't have an insane quirk like Todoroki's? There was no point in trying to lie about it after such a thorough analysis, so all he could do was smile and say, "Why yeah, that's right. Whoa, a bad luck quirk. I've never heard of a quirk like that before." The pink-skinned girl Ashido exclaimed. Zero, who'd seen Izuku's quirk in action twice during the physical exam the other day, mused with a finger scratching his cheek. I was thinking it just broke stuff or something. I didn't even think something like that could exist. It's certainly a unique quirk. And that's what makes quirks quirks. All Might stuck out a thumbs up while declaring, "Well done with your analysis again, Yaoyorozu. And well done to the fighters of this round. You all did wonderfully." Izuku felt himself relax at All Might's words. The rest of his classmates didn't seem too put off by his quirk, most only showing curious expressions. The only major exception was Katsuki, who looked like he was silently fuming, but Izuku expected that considering Katsuki didn't outperform Izuku like he wanted. The rest of the battles just seemed to fly by. Everyone gave a good effort with no major landslide wins like the one Todoroki's team had, and no one was seriously hurt. Izuku was inwardly relieved about that last part. Based on everyone's fights, the ones that had been most likely to cause major injury were Katsuki or himself, and he didn't want either of them to be the cause of someone else's pain. Not that Katsuki himself cared about that. All Might dismissed them for the day. But before Izuku could leave for the locker room, his hero called out to him to wait a moment. As everyone continued forward, Izuku paused and turned back towards All Might with his usual smile. He wasn't forcing it very much, but he wanted to at least give his best effort for his favorite hero. "Yes, All Might Sensei. Sorry for keeping you, but I just wanted to check on how you were doing since I last saw you. Don't think I've forgotten our previous encounter. To be honest, I wasn't sure if you would remember." He let his smile turn sheepish and rubbed the back of his neck. "You probably saved so many people just within the course of one day. I can't imagine you remember every single person." All Might laughed, unoffended by Izuku's assumption. "Haha, perhaps not, but I try my best. And you certainly left an impression. So how are you and your mother faring? I hope her recovery from whatever happened went smoothly." All at once, the little joy he felt inside at being about to talk to All Might transformed into nausea. He couldn't talk about this, not to his hero who grinned at him with the positive air of a good man assuming the best. It was too much, too painful. I am really sorry, but I have to leave." Izuku fled like an anxiety-ridden coward in the most suspicious manner possible, but he was too busy trying to not think about what happened to his mom to care. He redressed with robotic movements, simply focusing on finishing as fast as possible so that he could leave. He needed the relief of letting his expression fall, which meant he needed to either get to somewhere he could be alone or somewhere with Hitoshi. He didn't want his cheery classmates to see how much of a mess he is. But it wasn't quite meant to be, because Uraraka caught him to chat on their way towards the school gate, and Ida followed suit. When leaving the classroom, he caught Tokoyami staring at him out of the corner of his eye and forced himself to give a bright smile with a promise to see him tomorrow. Tokoyami seemed to relax at Izuku's reassuring and responded in kind, so he thought that was the right thing to do. Shoji, who had been talking to Tokoyami, waved at him as well. Hitoshi was at the gate when they arrived. He looked over Uraraka and Ida with neutral but examining eyes while Izuku gave a short introduction, just an explanation that they've been friends since before UA without giving the fairly important detail that they were housed with the same foster family. Izuku and Hitoshi went one way at the train station while Ida and Uraraka went their own separate ways. They walked from their station to the Haruka home with Izuku's random half-hearted rambling about his classmates' quirks to fill the silence. And once they reached their room finally Izuku let himself and his posture deflate into a grimace. Immediately Hitoshi gained his own grimace. What happened? Today was supposed to be your first class with All Might and you haven't said a single word about it. Did either he or Bakugo do something? Izuku flopped onto his bed to lay down with a sigh. He chose to face the wall rather than Hitoshi. No, I mean, yes, technically. Our fights were decided randomly today, so I used my quirk to avoid getting Katsuki. And that was good except for the fact that I'm an awful cheater now like everyone's always said I was. You're not a cheater for looking out for your own well-being. And then All Might said I did good and that he remembered me, so that was great. But then he asked about how Mom was doing and Izuku had to stop talking to let himself take a very needed breath of air before sighing out, panicked, and left him there awkwardly. And now I don't want to go back to school cause I don't want to explain what happened. He felt the bed dip and groan when Hitoshi sat down next to him. A warm hand rubbed his shoulder. If All Might had known what happened, he would have known asking would upset you. You don't have to say anything you don't want to, though. Just let him make his own conclusions and leave the topic alone. Even if he ends up being the nosy type, he's not allowed to badger you for details. And don't feel bad about that stuff with Bakugo. I don't trust him to restrain himself with you, so I'm glad you took precautions. Izuku partly relaxed under Hitoshi's comfort, but tension still riddled his core. I know. What you said is what made me decide to do that, actually. And I know I don't have to say anything, but just the thought that he's wondering about it and will figure it out himself makes me. I just don't like it. I'm sorry you had a rough day. I'll sit with you at lunch tomorrow if you want. I wouldn't say I had a rough day. A lot of good things have been happening, actually. I made friends with Uraraka-san and Ida-san. And I made friends with someone else today too, I think. And I like my hero costume and got to wear it for the first time. And I won my battle trial with Uraraka-san today. He felt a familiar weight behind his eyes, the feeling of his body wanting to cry but not being quite able to. His face pinched almost painfully. I just really wish she could be here to see all that, too. Hitoshi's hand tightened its grip. I understand that feeling. I wish my dad was here to see this too. I wish he could have met you. He was worried about my lack of friends. Mom was like that. I wish my mom could have met you too. Izuku, I've been trying not to pry too much with you, but your smile since the end of school was so. I don't know, it's too much like how you acted before. So I need to ask for your safety. Are you thinking suicidal thoughts right now? And in general, have you stopped thinking them or are they still a regular thing? His body froze up, but after a moment, he got himself to release most of that tension and turned from his side onto his back so that he could look up at Hitoshi. Hitoshi was looking down at him with his brows furrowed in concern. I wouldn't say that I'm continuously thinking about that. I used to still think them often in order, but ever since middle school ended, it's not a frequent thing. I try to think about my goals for the future instead. My goal to let you be a hero, he didn't add. He had to avert his eyes from Hitoshi's deep purple ones to focus on his shirt. I guess I do get the random feeling that it might be something I want to do, though. Like when I'm anxious or want to avoid something. Like when you want to avoid Bakugo. And like what you're feeling right now. Izuku's grimace deepened into something sadder. He pressed the palm of his hand into his eyes. Why yeah, but it's not like I actively want to die. It's just the feeling I have is similar to how I feel when I've thought of dying. Like I feel like it would be a relief even though my thoughts say it's not. I'm just tired, still. I don't feel the need to die, but I don't feel the need to live, either. There was an extended moment of silence. Then, Izuku felt Hitoshi's hand gently guide his head over to the side, and only realized what it was being guided to once he turned over onto his other side to lay his head in the other's lap. Hitoshi carted his hands through his curls. It's okay, it sounds like things are getting better. You'll get to the point where you don't feel like that anymore, so just make sure to tell me if it gets worse, okay? And, sorry if you don't like this. You just looked like you were lonely. It's okay, I like it. Izuku closed his eyes and just let himself enjoy the feeling of Hitoshi's touch. And I'll tell you, but you don't have to worry about me trying again. Even if I get worse, I really want to live for you, I promise. I won't leave you. Hitoshi's hands paused for a split second, then continued to soothe his head. While his deep voice became more soothing to Izuku's ears, I know, but I still want to watch over you properly. And I'd rather know when you're not feeling good. Anyway, you did good telling me today. Izuku felt a little joy light up in his melancholy at Hitoshi's praise, before it was brought down when he continued with, but if having to see Bakugo makes it worse, then I think you should really tell Eraserhead, Izuku. He immediately tensed back up. No, I can't. I'll get used to seeing him. It might even be a good thing to desensitize me now that I know Eraserhead will stop him if he goes too far. So when you decided to avoid getting set against him, was that only because the thought scared you, or was it also because you don't think All Might will stop him? All Might will stop him. The setup just sort of put him too far away to feel comfortable. And it was mostly because I was scared anyway. Okay, but if things with him don't improve, you should really consider trying to get him transferred to Class B at least. Expulsion isn't the only option on the table. Izuku didn't respond to that. He couldn't imagine the teachers would change a student's class placement after the year's already begun just because of one student's feelings. And he didn't want to lie to Hitoshi by saying that he would try if it got to that point. Hitoshi ignored his obvious lack of response. And if it makes you feel any better, I really like your hero costume, too. It's cool, and it's very you. His chest got tighter, but it was from a breathless feeling instead of just pain. Izuku brought his hand up to grab onto Hitoshi's, pulling it from his hair to cradle it into his chest, and he turned over to look up and give him a sad smile. Hitoshi was looking down at him with a sort of intensity he couldn't name. Thank you, Hitoshi-kun. You always know just what to say. You're so kind. I don't do as much for you as you do for me. Hitoshi scowled at that last part. I don't feel that way. You're my friend too, you know. I know, that's why I want to do more for you. Is there anything I could be doing? Anything you want me to do for you? It doesn't matter what it is, I'd do anything for you. Hitoshi's eyes glanced over him once with a serious expression, lingering on his face, before he closed his eyes. He sighed, don't say that kind of stuff. And I don't want anything from you, I just want you to keep being honest with me. Okay. The smile fell off his face, but he was still content. They just laid like that for a while, enjoying the warmth of having another person beside them. Toshinori dragged himself through the hallways of the emptying school and into the teacher's lounge. Once the door was safely closed behind him, he deflated in puffs of bellowing steam back into his true form and sighed, seeing that Eraserhead was there along with Present Mike, and that both of them turned their heads to stare at him at the sound of his entrance. He sighed harder. What are you sighing about? That's not very normal for our number one smiler. Present Mike inquired in a joking tone while tilting his head in curiosity. Immediately, Eraserhead narrowed his eyes at Toshinori in suspicion. Today were the battle trials. What happened? Recovery girl didn't notify me about any injuries, because there weren't any. Everyone is in fine shape. Toshinori frowned as he continued on to the part he knew would upset Eraserhead. It's just, I messed up with Midoriya-kun by asking him some questions that it seems like I shouldn't have. Eraserhead was outright scowling now. Explain. Toshinori winced at the harsh word. I asked him about how his mother was doing, since during my previous encounter with him I dropped him off at the hospital where she was admitted. Midoriya didn't react well and left without answering, so I'm guessing her situation. Present Mike frowned and looked at Eraserhead in a questioning manner. Eraserhead's scowl deepened and he brought a hand up to hold his temple. He sighed. There's no details in his records, but his primary contacts are listed as legal foster guardians. Whatever happened, he's not with her anymore. Toshinori sat his weary body down in a chair. He stared down at his designated desk. Then I brought back unpleasant memories. I have to do something to help him feel better. No, leave him be. Toshinori glanced over at Eraserhead's scowling face. If he was so uncomfortable about you bringing it up, then he wouldn't appreciate you sticking into his business even further. I won't ask about it anymore. I just want to help. Even if you don't directly mention it, he'll know the thing that you're trying to cheer him up about. If he comes in pretending like nothing happened, then he wouldn't like you trying to address it even indirectly. Just give a basic apology so he knows you won't ask again and drop it. Toshinori's frown deepened. It made the lines of his emancipated face sharpen even further than usual. But him pretending like nothing happened isn't a particularly good way to do things either. He's got a point. Shouta. Present Mike spoke up for the first time. Eraserhead rubbed at his eyes. Don't call me that during school hours. And I know that. But frankly, we as teachers can't push anything unless we start seeing more concerning behavior from him. As soon as it looks like he's in need of an intervention, we'll do something. But until that happens, we have to respect our students' boundaries. And really, what is there to bring up with him right now? We don't like that you don't want to talk about your possible deceased mother with All Might. That's just ridiculous. When he put it that way, it was a ridiculous thing to get worked up about. Of course, the boy would try to avoid talking about that kind of thing. It's nothing to be concerned about. Toshinori may have accidentally caused him some sorrow, But as long as he doesn't do that again, things should be okay. But despite this, he noticed that present Mike wasn't as satisfied with that answer, going by the frown he was still wearing. Even though you know that, you're still preparing for him needing an intervention though. There's something else about him that makes you worried, right? His demeanor is very anxious, but he doesn't let it show. That might just be how he is or because of his history with his quirk. But that kind of thing can be indicative of other problems, especially if he's grieving over a parent. I just want to make sure we're watching him carefully for that. I see, Toshinori muttered to himself. He didn't like that thought. Hopefully Midoriya was handling his grief well, but Eraserhead was right that it's better to be prepared than not. Hitoshi had come to terms with the fact that he apparently has a massive crush on Izuku. It was obvious how that crush came to be. They spent so much time with each other, literally living in the same room, and he was basically the only consistently positive human interaction Hitoshi had. That along with his cute face, his earnest affection, and goodwill, and Hitoshi's brain didn't really stand a chance. He tried to deny it at first, but after the first night of his realization that he thought Izuku would look hot with earrings, he caught himself purposely not looking at Izuku as they changed in their room for bed. That's when he had the mental connection. Oh, shit, I really want to look at him. It got worse when they started UA and Izuku actually got said earrings. It shouldn't be possible for a boy with a face as baby cute as his to look hot. But he did, damn it. And his hero costume was as cool as it was edgy. But then they got home on the day Izuku had his first hero basic training class, and Hitoshi had to come to terms with something else. I really want to live for you, I promise. I won't leave you. This situation doesn't feel right. None of it feels right. When having a crush, most people would be worried about said crush rejecting their feelings. And while he'd vaguely had that thought, his mind was leading into a totally different direction now. Because while it was true that Izuku might still not feel the same way as him, it was also true that if Hitoshi let him know how he felt, Izuku might try to reciprocate even if his heart wasn't in it. Is there anything I could be doing? Anything you want me to do for you? It doesn't matter what it is, I'd do anything for you. It's not that he thought Izuku would outright lie to him, but in his attempt to please Hitoshi he might end up thinking, Hitoshi wants this, and I want to give Hitoshi what he wants, so that's like wanting to be with Hitoshi, right? Wrong, totally wrong. Those weren't the same things at all. The situation reminded Hitoshi of his quirk. Because Izuku was so emotionally dependent on him, Hitoshi could tell him to do whatever and he'd do it gladly, but that didn't mean it was really what Izuku wanted to do. In the case of him telling Izuku not to kill himself, that was a good thing. But it wouldn't be good for any circumstance that wasn't just Hitoshi trying to keep Izuku from hurting himself. Hitoshi could probably tell him to do something ridiculous like give up his spot in the hero department so Hitoshi could transfer in. And Izuku would do it even if he was emotionally killing himself and his dream in the process. All because Izuku felt like he owed Hitoshi for something as simple as having basic human decency. That's not right. He's not an expert when it comes to friendship, but even he could tell that's not what being friends means. He doesn't quite know what it actually means. But it's surely not that. Even if he wanted to try to act on his new feelings, he can't. Because he can't take the risk that he'd be taking advantage of Izuku. And Izuku probably wasn't emotionally in the right place for that kind of thing anyway. All Hitoshi could do was ignore these unnecessary thoughts. What it came down to was that right now, Hitoshi had too much emotional power over Izuku. He knew that would end up happening due to his dedicate your life to me spiel. But when he was reminded of it to this extent, it disturbed him. However, it doesn't have to stay that way. Now that Hitoshi's seen what UA has to offer firsthand, he's more optimistic about that outcome. Not only did Eraserhead seem to be a promising candidate for a reliable adult figure that Hitoshi might be able to convince Izuku to confide to about his suicidal thoughts, but it looked like Izuku is taking the right steps to having friends in 1A. This is Uraraka Ochako and Ida Tenya, who, you actually met the other day. I just thought it'd be good to reintroduce you. And this is Tokoyami Fumikage, who I fought against in the battle trial yesterday. And this is Tokoyami's friend and our other classmate Shoji Nezu. Nice to see you again, Shinsou-kun. I'm pleased to see you could join us for lunch this time. A pleasure to make your acquaintance. The darkness dwelling in your eyes is not misplaced with this group. Nice to meet you. The multi-handed Shoji ended the roundtable greetings with a sentence that was almost hilariously simple compared to the bird-headed Tokoyamis which had come before it. Shoji grew extra eyes to stare at Tokoyami, obviously aware of the discrepancy. Nice to meet you all too. Hitoshi had to force himself from adding on an I guess at the end of that, since that'd probably make his greeting more controversial than it needed to be. He glanced at Izuku to see he was smiling at everyone, as he always did. It wasn't one of the true smiles Hitoshi's seen from him, but he seemed pretty relaxed. So he was probably feeling positive about this whole thing. He'd committed to his promise to join Izuku for lunch today, but only because he'd already strategically gone some days not sitting with Izuku to hopefully get Izuku to interact with his classmates more. And it seems like it's paid off. They've only just started the school year, and his friend is already introducing him to 4 different people. 4 people? Huh, maybe that number's not really a coincidence. He sat back and let the hero kids take over the conversation. According to their rambling, the class had voted for their representatives today, and Izuku got the most votes, though the number was admittedly low due to most people just voting for themselves. Why they didn't make it so that people couldn't vote for themselves like normal logic dictated, Hitoshi hadn't the slightest idea. But privileged kids with privileged hero quirks did tend to be not quite right in the head. Izuku, visibly repressing awkwardness and embarrassment at this point, explained that he turned the position down, and so it fell to the runner-up named Yaorazu, and that they were still deciding on the vice president, Uraraka, Ida, and Tokoyami all needled him about that, since all 3 of them had voted for him, but Izuku just brushed off the question by saying that he wasn't comfortable with that type of role. While that was true, Hitoshi suspected that there was more to it. He wouldn't ask Izuku about it in front of the hero kids, though, as he obviously didn't want to tell them his real reason. They also talked about other things, like how Ida was part of that famous hero family with Ingenium being his brother. Hitoshi had been right on the mark with his privileged hero quirk kid thought. Some people just got all the luck straight from birth, and how Uraraka wanted to be a hero so she could support her parents. That was more along the lines of what people with less fortunate backgrounds wished they could do, so he was more sympathetic about that. Anyone who tried to tell her that it was a shallow reason like Uraraka feared clearly never had to worry about food being on their plates. Hitoshi was extremely aware that he was only getting by on the goodwill of the Harukas, who were in a good enough place that they could offer their home to 5 children that weren't their own. He might criticize them in his thoughts about their fear of his and Izuku's quirks, but he's not so ungrateful that he wouldn't give them credit for that. Tokoyami and Shoji also gave their own explanations on how they ended up trying to be heroes. It seems like something that's within the reach of my abilities, and I'm physically strong enough to do it, so I felt like I should. It's natural to want to help people when you know you're capable of helping, isn't it? Shoji explained with a shrug. The darkness of my soul is pervasive to the point that my quirk reflects it, but I would like to use that darkness for good. Things that are dark are not fated to be bad. Tokoyami intoned with closed eyes and a single nod of his head. Those are cool reasons. What about you, Midoriya-kun? Why are you trying to be a hero? Uraraka turned her shining eyes and smiled on Izuku, and from next to him Hitoshi could feel unseen tension enter his body. Well, he never got to answer, as the sound of the school's level 3 security system alarm system cut him off, but Hitoshi suspected he hadn't wanted to answer in the first place. There was a huge commotion over the alarm. An upperclassman explained it was because a level 3 security breach meant that someone had infiltrated the campus. That was concerning to say the least, but once they pushed their way out into the hallway, a look through UAS ceiling-to-floor windows showed it was only the press. Those media bastards. As though Izuku and him hadn't had a hard enough time this morning turning down their poor attempts to solicit interviews on what it's like to have All Might as a teacher. Now they were outright causing panic and trespassing on private property. If he was down there, he'd brainwash them to take their asses back out the door without restraint. Izuku would agree it's the perfect way to exercise the non-violent resolution advantage of his quirk. The hero kids he was now involved with apparently couldn't leave things be, going so far as to have Uraraka send Ida flying into the exit sign just so he could get everyone's attention. This led to people finally chilling out and stopping their stampede. Izuku got lost during this process, so Hitoshi was internally relieved when he popped back up again relatively unscathed. With the eventful lunch period over, Hitoshi parted from Izuku to head back to general education. During his time in boring classes that were still going over introductory material, Hitoshi let his mind wander to his observations concerning the hero kids. The first major step to having Izuku transition from living for Hitoshi to living for himself would be to reduce his dependency on Hitoshi by expanding his social interactions. The more people that could act as a reason for Izuku to want to live, the more motivated he would be to stick around. Hitoshi had had the vague hope that UA would be able to offer Izuku what his middle school life lacked, and it looked like that was becoming a reality. All 4 of the WANA students Hitoshi met seemed like they would at least object if Izuku mentioned something about no one caring if he was alive or not, so that was one thing in their favor. But when it came to Izuku having deep relationships with them, Hitoshi was less sure. Ida and Uraraka were both the standard optimistic, keep your spirits up type, and that would just motivate Izuku to keep up his always have to be happy mentality. Hitoshi knew the 2 of them wouldn't mean to support Izuku keeping up fake emotions like that. But Hitoshi was sure that at this point, any time Izuku's anxiety or depressive attitude showed itself, their first response would be to try to cheer him up, and that Izuku would respond to that by pretending to feel better. That would make it harder for Izuku to actually feel better. In his opinion, their approach to things was the last thing Izuku needed right now, and he could easily imagine it spiraling into a repeating cycle of their true optimism feeding into Izuku's fake optimism. Xiaoji wasn't so clear-cut on the optimism versus pessimism spectrum, but Hitoshi's overall impression of him was that he was a fairly normal guy, so Izuku might want to keep up appearances that he was normal because of it. And Izuku's version of normal also included being happy. However, Tokoyami was another matter entirely. Hitoshi had never been so relieved to not see a person crack a smile once over the course of a full conversation. He was clearly the edgy Tsunabiu type, the kind of person that found interest in dark subjects like Izuku. Hell, he'd repeated the word dark at least a couple of times in the few sentences he'd spoke. And Hitoshi could easily see Izuku bonding over that. The other boy was always elated whenever he could ramble onto Hitoshi about whatever occult knowledge he was thinking about at the time. And having someone that already had an active interest in that was sure to fuel that fire. Tokoyami would reassure Izuku that his non-typical interests weren't a bad thing. But most importantly, Tokoyami was a person that didn't require Izuku to act cheerful, since the boy himself was on the opposite spectrum from that. Given enough time, Izuku would realize this himself and hopefully let go of his habits when with Tokoyami. Maybe that was wishful thinking on Hitoshi's part, but there was at least a higher chance of Tokoyami being able to achieve that kind of honesty from Izuku compared to, say, Uraraka or... With that in mind, Hitoshi left class feeling more optimistic about Izuku's chances to get to a better emotional place during their time at UA. The two of them were soon reunited at the end of the day. Izuku met him out by the gate like usual, and together they made their way to the train station. The sun was behind them, extending their shadows on the concrete in front of them, but not yet low enough to change the blue of the sky. It was a beautiful day, with the birds still out and the leaves on the trees still green in the midst of spring. Izuku glanced back at the backpack he was carrying, fiddling with one of the straps. His face was relaxed into a natural, neutral look. Because of what happened at lunch, we all voted Ida-san to be the vice president. I wasn't able to give the others the charms I picked out for them because of that too. But I guess since Xiaoji's tagging along with Tokoyami, that was probably for the best. I wouldn't want him to feel left out. I'll pick one out for him first. Hitoshi frowned as he thought about the implication of Izuku giving the hero kids what he assumed to be good luck charms. Are you giving them charms to ward off your quirk? I know you think I don't need to, but it's better to be safe than sorry. I hear giving gifts is a thing that friends appreciate. Anyways, Izuku mumbled guiltily and averted his eyes down towards the concrete. Hitoshi had to keep himself from sighing. He knew that Izuku honestly felt more secure knowing Hitoshi always carried that rabbit's foot charm with him, since Hitoshi spent so much time with Izuku and therefore Izuku's quirk. But he wished that Izuku could truly understand that he had control over Jinx and that precautions were unnecessary. As long as he thought like this, he would always think he was at fault for his mother's accident. Is that something else Hitoshi could work on with him? But his words alone aren't getting anywhere. He doesn't know how to get progress. He decided to keep the conversation going instead of prodding. Tokoyami seems like exactly the kind of guy you'd want to hang out with. The corners of Izuku's mouth curled up into a small smile. It made something inside Hitoshi feel elated at the sight. Right, he likes my costume too, and his quirk is some kind of sentient shadow. Do you think maybe he likes occult and stuff? I would bet real money that he likes occult, Izuku. He speaks like he's living in a Lovecraft novel. Izuku gasped slightly, his hand coming up to cup his chin in thought. Do you think he's read Lovecraft? That's such an old foreign author. Even if they'd heard of him, most people wouldn't bother to read his works. Maybe he might have watched those old horror movies too. I wouldn't be surprised. The night that Izuku had pulled Hitoshi into a mixed binge of black and white relics and other century-old Japanese-produced horror films was a night that Hitoshi somewhat regretted. The black and white movies had been as laughably out of date as the Japanese films had been genuinely terrifying. And for a couple nights after, Hitoshi had been on edge at the possibility of girls with long black hair and white dresses appearing out of nowhere. Sure, they still made movies like that now, but the inclusion of the characters or the ghost's quirk tended to distract from the supernatural feeling. Izuku, however, had already watched all those movies and had been happy to rewatch them, so Hitoshi didn't mind too much. I'll have to ask him when I see him next time. Izuku's face minutely shifted from geeky relish to unemotive once more, and he looked back up at Hitoshi to continue speaking. So Hitoshi-kun, have you made any friends in your class? That made him take a mental pause. Not particularly. I mean, so far no one that I've introduced my quirk to has tried to avoid me or talked shit about it, so it's going better than it normally does so far. Izuku frowned slightly. He glanced away for a second, before refocusing his green eyes on Hitoshi again. I see. That's too bad. I'm sorry. I was hoping that by not eating lunch with you for the first couple of days you could make some friends, you know. Hitoshi blinked stupidly at Izuku. That was exactly what I was doing, too. He managed to get a momentary half-smile from that, but it left Izuku's face as soon as it came. I know you don't plan on staying in 1 degree Celsius, but maybe you should try finding people you're comfortable with, at least. You might have to stay there a while. If you get put in one, you're already off to a good start now though. Those green eyes glance back down at their still moving feet. I just think it will be better for you if you have more friends than just me. Don't get me wrong, I'll always stand by you and be your friend, but I feel like I'm not enough to give you what you need. Not alone, that is. Itoshi found himself unconsciously stopping his steps. Izuku stopped with him a couple steps ahead and looked back at him. He couldn't name what Izuku was feeling based on his expression. It was too blank. That's right. While Hitoshi was all Izuku had, Izuku was all Hitoshi had. He'd been so focused wanting to fix the first part that he didn't even think of the second part as a problem. What would he do when Izuku gained all these new friends that Hitoshi wanted him to have? Izuku will move on to bigger and better things with future heroes while Hitoshi's left behind again, back to where he started. Alone, it was unbearable to think about. There was a crushing pain in his chest. Hitoshi-kun, there's no need to have that look on your face. Before he knew it, Izuku stepped in front of him to hold his cheek, his palm so warm against Hitoshi's skin it almost burned. His face was cast in Hitoshi's shadow, and he smiled at Hitoshi in a sad sort of way. It doesn't matter who I meet or if I get more friends. You'll always be the most important person to me. The only reason I'm here to meet all of them is because of you, after all. I don't want that. That's exactly what he wants. If you find someone that becomes more important, then that's fine. That's life. It's not fine. He hates the very idea of it. Just be with your classmates normally and let things happen the way they happen. You don't have to coddle me. Hitoshi truly, desperately wished that he could tell his irrational emotions to fuck off. He could only hope that they weren't showing on his face. Izuku stared at him a bit longer, and only then dropped his hand. It moved to take one of Hitoshi's and guide him back into walking away from Yue. He wasn't looking at Hitoshi as he said, "If that's what you want, Hitoshi-kun." They made their way back to the house. The blue of the afternoon sky fell into the orange and red of dusk, which fell into the black of night. Instead of being kept up by imaginary ghosts, Hitoshi was kept up by the haunting thought that Izuku's response was a deflection and not a real agreement. A couple days later, on the day of a certain field trip for 1A, Izuku walked into their shared bathroom, and when he looked in the mirror it shattered. He stared at it with a vacant expression. Much like he did that day Hitoshi caught him trying to jump off Orator's roof. Hitoshi quickly pulled him away, worried about his mental state. After a minute, Izuku pulled himself together and took out his phone. Looking over his shoulder, Hitoshi could see he was looking up the daily horoscope. It says Cancers will face ill fortune today, so Jinx is acting up. What a bad omen. Izuku glanced up at Hitoshi with a dull look in his eye, and he could tell what his friend was thinking. Nothing's going to happen to me today, I promise. I'm just going to be in class. Just make sure to wear your charm today, please. Hitoshi rubbed the back of his head and sighed. Fine. Nothing will happen probably, but since you do have training today, contact me if you get hurt or something. Okay. I don't really care too much if something happens to me. Izuku quickly backtracked upon seeing Hitoshi's fierce scowl. Right. I'll let you know as soon as I can. Hitoshi placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, hoping he could reassure the worries he knew the other would still have. Yue is probably the safest place in the area. Nothing major will happen there, especially with All Might around. Just try to remember that. Izuku nodded, but he didn't smile. That was a good thing, because the smile would have been a lie anyway. I'll try. Thanks, Hitoshi-kun. What he said shouldn't have been wrong. With Yue's notorious security, it should have been the safest place to be. But as it was, while nothing happened on Hitoshi's end, the same couldn't be said for Izuku.